Martin Buber, Tales of the Hasidim. Book 2, The Later Masters. From the School of Rabbi Elimelech of Lezhensk. Abraham Yehoshua Heschel of Apt. Knowing the future. When young Heschel walked across the field, he heard the future in the rustle of growing things. And when he walked through the street, he heard the future in men's footsteps. But when he fled from the world and withdrew to the silence of his room, his own limbs told him the future. Then he began to fear, being uncertain whether he could keep to the true way now that he knew where his feet were taking him. So he gathered courage and prayed that this knowledge be taken from him, and God in his mercy granted his prayer. The bribe. In his youth, Rabbi Abraham Yehoshua was head of the law court in Kolbishov, and there were 5 cities in his district. Once he was to decide a lawsuit together with 2 judges who had been bribed. Since he obstinately opposed all their suggestions, they finally advised the person who had bribed them, who knew as well as they that the rabbi was incorruptible, to slip a considerable sum of money into the pocket of the special coat, which Rabbi Abraham Yehoshua wore only on the day of the new moon. The man took their advice and managed it unobserved. At the next court session, the rabbi felt himself inclining to the opinion of his fellow judges. For a while he was silent. Then he postponed decision for a day, went to his room and cried his heart out to God. On the day of the new moon, he put on his special coat and found the money. He summoned the man and forced him to confess what he had done. Whenever the rabbi of Apt related this incident, he would cite a verse from the 5th book of Moses. For a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise, and pervert the words of the righteous. End quote. Tzaddikim come to Kolbishov. Rabbi Shmelke of Sasov, the son of Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, was still a child at the time of his father's death. Once, when he was a young man, he visited the rabbi of apartment. In honor of his guest, the rabbi had the candles lit in the house of study and received him with such kindness that the youth was embarrassed. The moment he had rather reluctantly seated himself in the armchair drawn up for him, the rabbi of Apt turned to him and told him the following: "I owe it to your father that I began to serve God in the right way. At that time I was Rav in the little town of Kolbishov, and thought the finest thing in the world was to learn for the sake of learning. One afternoon when I was sitting over my books, I heard a carriage drive past. I left the room and found 2 men just getting off. The older, short and frail, the younger, a veritable giant. They walked up to me, but since I resented being disturbed in my studies, I did not ask who they were. I only offered them some pastries and a sweet liqueur and went back to my books. They sat and talked to each other without paying any attention to me. I took myself firmly in hand and tried to go on studying without being distracted. Yet I could not help hearing some of their words, especially as there was something majestic and solemn in their voices and the expression of their faces. They were indeed speaking of solemn matters, apparently continuing a discussion they had begun on their journey. But in my soul, I rejected the idea of having anything to do with it, for I said to myself, that is not my way, so why should I concern myself with it? Later, I accompanied them to the house of prayer. After the prayer, they asked me whether I could put them up for the night. At that time, there was not much room in my house, but it was impossible to turn away men such as these. That was perfectly clear to me. So I said yes, served them coffee, and went on studying. And the same thing happened as before. They continued their discussion, and my mind was torn between trying to concentrate on my reading and fighting against listening. Then I prepared a place for them to sleep, and I too lay down. Around midnight, I rose as always and began to study. In the next room, I heard them talking about sublime matters. Early in the morning, they came to bid me farewell and asked me in a way that seemed quite casual what passage in the Talmud I was studying at the moment. When I told them, they began to discuss that passage. The older man made a remark about it. The younger raised an objection, and when half an hour was up, between them, they had completely illuminated the passage, and I realized that I had not understood it properly until then. Then, to cite an example for something he had said, the older man told a story about the Baal Shem Tov, and in the same way the younger told one too. When they had finished their stories, they took leave of me, and even then I did not ask them anything, for I was glad to continue my studies undisturbed. But as, in my usual custom, I was walking up and down the balcony a little before going to the house of prayer, I suddenly thought, why didn't I ask those men who they were and why they came? And then, bit by bit, the words I had caught while I was studying came back to me and formed a connected whole. Only then did I know with certainty that what they had said had been sublime. From that time on, I could do nothing but think of them. I repeated their words to myself and saw that they were intended to be properly learned. But then I noticed that from day to day my prayer was becoming purer and stronger. The words I had heard surrounded the prayer and purified and strengthened it. I grew sadder and sadder at the thought that I had let the men go without becoming acquainted with them, and my longing to see them again increased. Another early morning, 2 weeks afterward, I was walking up and down the balcony with just a skull cap on, for I was in the habit of putting on my fur cap only before going to the house of prayer, when I saw a carriage passing the house. Evidently, it was not going to stop. The 2 men were in it. I rushed out with only my cap on my head and called a word of greeting. The carriage stopped. They returned my greeting indifferently, and the older man added, "We are in a hurry. We want to pray in the next village. Can't I get you something to eat?" I asked. "Well, all right," said the younger, a little more cordially. "Get us a few pretzels," but quickly. It took a few moments to fetch them, and when I came out of the house, the carriage was making off at full speed. I swiftly snatched up prayer shawl and phylacteries, and holding them in one hand and the pretzels in the other, I ran after the carriage in my skull cap and shouted to them to stop. But they did not seem to hear me, and not until I had mustered all my strength to catch up with them did the carriage stop. I got in, and we began to talk. I found out that the older man was the Rav of Berdichev, and the younger Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov, your father. After we had prayed in the next village, I offered them the pretzels, and they said the blessing and ate, and I with them. Then they wanted to send me home, but I begged to be allowed to accompany them a short way. So we drove off together, and they spoke to me, and then I asked questions, and they answered. The talk continued, and the carriage rolled along, and I was not aware that the hours were passing. When the carriage stopped, I discovered that we were in Lizensk, in front of Rabbi Elimelech's house. "Here you are," said your father. "This is where your light lives." And so I stayed on in Lizensk. Temptations. Joseph Lando, the rabbi of Jassy in Romania, had rejected a bribe offered him by a prominent member of his congregation, whom he had opposed because the man had violated a religious law. Shortly after this, he visited the rabbi of Apt, and with a self-satisfied air, told him how he had resisted temptation. When the Zadok bade him farewell, he blessed him and expressed the hope that he would become an honest and God-fearing man. "I am delighted with the blessing of my teacher and master," said Rabbi Joseph Landau, "and what more could I ask? But why did you wish me this just at this time?" The rabbi of Apt replied, "It is written, 'Also unto thee, O Lord, belongeth mercy, for thou renderest to every man according to his work.'" Those who expounded these verses asked themselves time and again why paying a hired man his proper wages should be called mercy. But the truth of the matter is that God has mercy when he leads every man into the temptation befitting his inner level, the common man into petty, the superior man into grave. Temptation. The fact that you were exposed to so slight a temptation is a sign that you have not yet reached one of the upper rungs to perfection. That is why I blessed you, asking God to let you ascend to them and be found worthy of a greater test. In hell. The rabbi of Apt said to God, "Lord of the world, I know that I have no virtue and no merit for which, after my death, you could set me in paradise among the righteous. But if you are thinking of putting me in hell among the evildoers, please remember that I cannot get along with them. So I beg of you to take all the wicked out of hell so you can put me in." The turning point. A respected woman once came to ask the advice of the rabbi of apartment. The instant he set eyes on her, he shouted, "Adulteress! You sinned only a short while ago, and yet now you have the insolence to step into this pure house." Then from the depths of her heart the woman replied, "The Lord of the world has patience with the wicked. He is in no hurry to make them pay their debts, and he does not disclose their secret to any creature, lest they be ashamed to turn to him. Nor does he hide his face from them. But the rabbi of Apt sits there in his chair and cannot resist revealing at once what the Creator has covered." From that time on, the rabbi of Apt used to say, "No one ever got the better of me except once, and then it was a woman." The proud and the humble. Once the rabbi of Apt came to a city in which two men competed for the privilege of giving him lodgings. Both houses were equally roomy and comfortable, and in both households all the rules were observed with pious exactness. But one of the men was in ill repute for his many love affairs and other sinful doings, and he knew quite well that he was weak and thought little of himself. The other man, however, no one in the whole community could accuse of the slightest breach of conduct. With proud and stately steps he walked abroad, thoroughly aware of his spotless purity. The rabbi selected the house of the man with the bad reputation. When he was asked the reason for his choice, he answered, "Concerning the proud, God says, 'I and he cannot live together in this world.' And if God himself, blessed be he, cannot share a room with the proud, then how could I?" We read in the Torah, on the other hand, "Who dwelleth with them in the midst of their uncleannesses? And if God takes lodgings there, why shouldn't I?" The Golden Scale. Rabbi Naphtali, a disciple of the rabbi of Apt, who later became the rabbi of Rupchitz, asked a fellow pupil to find out what their teacher thought of him. For half a year, his friend made every effort to get the rabbi to say something, but he said nothing about Naphtali, nothing good and nothing bad. So his fellow disciple told Naphtali, saying, "You see, the master has a golden scale in his mouth. He never passes judgment on anyone, for fear he might wrong him. Has he not forbidden us to judge even those who are supposed wicked through and through? For if anyone were to wrong them, he would be wronging God himself. It's really explain." Tall stories. The rabbi of Apt liked to tell tall stories. You might have taken them for meaningless exaggerations, and yet not only his disciples but others too saw meaning in them and found enlightenment. Once when he was visiting Rabbi Baruch of Mezbij, a grandson of the Baal Shem, and was just about to begin a story, Rabbi Baruch asked him to accompany him to the well which was called the Spring of the Baal Shem. The moment they reached the well, the rabbi of Apt started talking, and Rabbi Baruch stood by, leaning on his cane and listening. Among other things, the rabbi of Apt told about his son's wedding. The batter for the noodle dish was spread on leaves over the fences and even hung down from the rooftops. The Mezbij Hasidim who surrounded the two watched the wise lips of their rabbi and prepared to burst out laughing as soon as he did, but they saw that he was listening attentively and his lips were not twitching. Later, when the rabbi of Apt had left, Rabbi Baruch said, "Never have I heard such a golden tongue." On another occasion, when the rabbi of Apt went to Berdichev to call on Rabbi Levi Yitzhak, the people came in droves to see and greet him. Scarcely had he tasted the sweet liqueur and the cakes that had been set before him, when he began to walk up and down the room telling a story. He told how when he was a Rav in the town of Jassy, they had wanted to build a big bridge in front of his house, and what huge quantities of wood they had carted to the spot. A merchant who often went to Jassy to trade was among the listeners, and nodded eagerly. "Yes, Rabbi, that's just the way it was." The rabbi of Apt turned to him in surprise. "And how do you know about it?" he asked. Denunciation. Two young men who had been friends from childhood on lived in the same city. After they married, they decided to be partners in a business, and their business throve. But the wife of the one, who was clever and smooth in her dealings with customers, was displeased that her husband's friend, who had a good but somewhat stupid wife, should have half the profits. Her husband did indeed tell her that it is not our shrewdness or strength that matters, but only that which pleases God. She, however, would not accept his instruction, and pressed him more and more, until finally he said to his friend, "We must separate, dear friend, for I cannot stand this any longer." They divided up the business, but from that time on, the man with the dull wife had all the luck, while the clever wife made nothing but blunders in her buying and selling. She grew more and more malicious, and finally hit on the idea of having two bribed witnesses take a false oath that the other woman had committed adultery. The matter came before the religious court. When Rabbi Abraham Yehoshua had examined the witnesses, he sent for his son and said to him, "Have this posted all over the district. Whoever from this time on gives the rabbi of Apt a ruble is a sinner in Israel. For it says in the Torah, 'At the mouth of two witnesses shall he that is to die be put to death.' But I can see that this woman is without guilt. Thus what I see is contrary to the holy Torah, and whoever pays me taxes sins." When the rabbi of Apt had uttered these words with all solemnity, the witnesses were seized with terror. They nudged each other with their elbows and then confessed the truth. The world of illusion. Once the rabbi of Apt spoke of the world of illusion in which the souls of all those who die deluded by their own vanity stray, and he told this story. A few years ago, during a very cold winter, a poor man went to buy wood in the marketplace of our town. He wanted to warm the room for his wife who had just born a child. There were only a few faggots left, and he was just about to purchase them when the head of the community appeared and outbid him. The poor man, who could not pay a higher price, begged him in vain to have pity on his wife and child. That night the woman and baby fell sick, and they died a few days later. The man survived them for only a short while, but on the very day he died, the head of the community died too. Then the souls of both men appeared to me in a dream, for the poor man had summoned his opponent to my court. I pronounced the judgment. Many times in the course of his life, the head of the community had been brought before worldly judges on the complaints of those he had oppressed and tormented. But since he was well versed in all the intricacies of the law, he had always had the suits referred to one higher court after another, until he managed to get himself acquitted. Even now, in the world of illusion, he seemed just as sure of himself as he had been on earth, and appealed to a higher judge. He came without delay, but contrary to expectations, he not only agreed with my judgment, but pronounced an even harsher sentence. "I'll teach the judge," shouted the accused, and again appealed to a still higher court. But when the court convened, his sentence was again raised. "If I have to go to the emperor himself, I'll see this thing through," shouted the head of the community. By now, he has gotten as far as the governor. Those who are to hear, hear. Once a great throng of people collected about the rabbi of Apt to hear his teachings. "That won't help you," he cried to them. "Those who are to hear will hear even at a distance. Those who are not to hear will not hear, no matter how near they come." Ways. A disciple asked the rabbi of Apt, "It is written, 'For the Lord regardeth the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked shall perish.' The two parts of this sentence do not seem to belong together." The rabbi explained, "The righteous have many and devious ways, and the wicked have also many and devious ways. But the Lord knows the ways of the righteous by the fact that they are all one way, and that is the way. But the ways of the wicked are numerous and manifold, for they are nothing but many ways of losing the one way. In the end, they themselves realize that each is losing his own way, and all the ways. It is as though someone were walking through a wood and keeping to a certain path, not knowing why he has taken this particular path rather than another. He keeps walking day and night until he comes to a tall beech standing at the end of the path, and at that point, the way is lost. The man cannot go forward, and he does not dare to go back, for he has lost the way." Freedom of choice. Rabbi Heschel said, "It is God's will that there be freedom of choice. That is why he has waited until this day. For in the days of the temple they had the death penalty and whipping, and so there was no freedom. After that, Israel had penal codes, so there was still no freedom. But now everyone can sin openly and without shame and prosper. And so whoever leads a good life today is worthy in the eyes of God, and redemption depends on him. A great nation. The rabbi of Apt was asked. The Midrash points out that God said, "Go twice to Abraham, once when he bade him leave his father's house, and once when he commanded him to sacrifice his son." The explanation in the Midrash is that the first bidding, as well as the second, was a test. How are we to understand that? He replied, "When God bade Abraham leave his father's house, he promised to make of him a great nation." The evil urge observed with what eagerness he prepared himself for the journey and whispered to him, "You are doing the right thing. A great nation, that means power, that means possessions." But Abraham only laughed at him. "I understand better than you," he said. A great nation means a people that sanctifies the name of God. Every day. The rabbi of Apt said, "Every one of Israel is told to consider himself to be standing at Mount Sinai to receive the Torah. For man, there are past and future events, but not for God. Day in, day out, he gives the Torah." Two kinds of love. This question was put to the rabbi of Apt. It is written, "And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her." How shall we interpret this? One would think that the time seemed overlong for the lover, and that a day seemed as long as a year. The rabbi of Apt explained, "There are two kinds of love. The first attaches itself to the loved object and returns to the lover, and so every hour is long and hangs heavy on his hands, because the lover longs to go to his beloved. But the second, the love for one's true mate, does not return to the lover, so it does not matter whether he lives 1 or 1,000 miles away from his beloved. That is why we read, "And Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed unto him but a few days, for the love he had to her. It was her he loved. His love clung to her, and did not return to him. He was not concerned with himself and his desire. His was the true love." Like a vessel. Rabbi Heschel said, "A man should be like a vessel that willingly receives what its owner pours into it, whether it be wine or vinegar." We shape a human likeness for God. Our sages said, "Know what is above you." This is how the rabbi of Apt expounded those words. Know what is above is from you. And what is it that is above you? This is what Ezekiel says. "And upon the likeness of the throne was a likeness as the appearance of a man upon it above." How can this be said with reference to God? For is it not written, "To whom then will ye liken me, that I should resemble him?" But the truth of the matter is that it is we who make a likeness as the appearance of a man. It is the likeness we shape when we serve with devout hearts. With such a heart we shape a human likeness for our Creator, for Him. Blessed be He, and blessed be His name, who can be likened to none. When a man is merciful and renders loving help, he assists in shaping God's right hand. And when a man fights the battle of God and crushes evil, he assists in shaping God's left hand. He who is above the throne, it is you who have made him. The widow. A disciple of the rabbi of Apt related this story. Once I was present at a conversation my teacher carried on with a widow. He spoke to her of her widowhood in good, comforting words, and she allowed her soul to be comforted and found new strength. But I saw that he wept, and I too began to weep. For suddenly I knew that he was speaking to the divine presence that is forsaken. The soul. On the Day of Atonement, when Rabbi Abraham Yehoshua would recite the Avodah, the prayer that repeats the service of the high priest in the Temple of Jerusalem, and would come to the passage, "And thus he spoke," he would never say those words, but would say, "And thus I spoke," for he had not forgotten the time his soul was in the body of a high priest of Jerusalem, and he had no need to learn from the outside how they had served in the temple. Once he himself related, 10 times have I been in this world. I was a high priest. I was a prince. I was a king. I was an exilarch. I was 10 different kinds of dignitary. But I never learned to love mankind perfectly. And so I was sent forth again and again in order to perfect my love. If I succeed this time, I shall never return again. Tears and laughter. A man once confessed a sin to the rabbi of Apt and told him with tears how he had atoned for it. The Tzaddik laughed. The man went on to tell what more he intended doing to atone for his sin. The rabbi went on laughing. The man wanted to speak on, but the laughter robbed him of his speech. He stared at the Tzaddik in horror, and then his very soul held its breath, and he heard that which is spoken deep within. He realized how trivial all his fuss about atoning had been, and turned to God. Later, the rabbi of Apt told his Hasidim, 2,000 years ago, before I became a high priest in the Temple of Jerusalem, I had to learn the service step by step. First, I was accepted into the company of young priests. At that time, this man who has just gone was one of those who lived remote from the rest. He was stern with himself, pure and proven in the practice of all the virtues, but unexpectedly he was snared in a serious sin. In accordance with the law, he prepared to bring a sign offering. This was the custom in those days. When a man came to the keeper in charge to choose an animal for the sacrifice, the official asked him what sin he was about to atone for. When the man would begin to speak, the sorrow of his secret would spill over, and he would pour his heart out like water. Then he would take the animal and walk through the streets of Jerusalem to the hall of the temple where the animal was to be slaughtered. There the young priests would come to meet him, and they too would inquire what his sin had been. And again his heart would melt like wax in fire. By the time such a man would reach the high priest and confess his innermost secret, he would be wholly transformed. Now when this man entered the temple hall with his sacrificial animal, I took pity on his ravaged and tear-stained face. I comforted him, wept with him, and eased his heart until he began to regain his composure, and his sin weighed on him less and less. When he came to the high priest, he did not experience the turning to God, and his offering was not graciously accepted. So, in the course of time, he had to come down to earth once more and appear before me again, but this time I loved him more. The servant of the Lord. The rabbi of Apt was asked, in the last chapter of the 5th book of Moses we read, "So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there." And we read again in the 1st chapter of Joshua, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord. Why should Moses be designated a servant of the Lord in the hour of his death and after it, just as if this were something new? For chapter after chapter before this we read how he served his Lord with all his heart and substance. The rabbi of Apt expounded, before Moses died, the Lord showed him the land from the top of Mount Nebo and said to him, "This is the land which I swore unto Abraham, unto Isaac, and unto Jacob." Rashi comments on this. God sent Moses forth and said, "Go and tell the patriarchs that I shall now fulfill the oath which I swore unto them." So even in his death, Moses was the messenger and faithful servant of God, and he died in order to serve in all eternity. The table. On the day of the new moon, in the month he was to die, the rabbi of Apt discussed at his table the death of the righteous man. When he had said grace, he rose and began to walk back and forth in the room. His face glowed. Then he stopped by the table and said, "Table, pure table, you will testify in my behalf that I have properly eaten and properly taught at your board." Weak. Later he bade that his coffin be made out of the table. The inscription. Before he died, the rabbi of Apt ordered his sons to have no other words of praise carved on his tombstone than, "He who loved Israel." That is the inscription on the stone. In dying. When he lay dying, the rabbi of Apt cried out, "Why does the son of Jesse delay?" He wept and said, before his death, the rabbi of Berdichev promised that he would disturb the peace of all the holy men, and that he would not stop until the Messiah came. But then they showered him with such delights in hall after hall that he forgot. But I shall not forget. I do not want to enter paradise before the coming of the Messiah. Beyond our vision. After the rabbi of Apt's death, two Tzaddikim met, Rabbi Yitzhak of Radzivil, the son of the Maggid of Zlotchov, and Rabbi Israel of Rizhin, the rabbi of Mezrich's great-grandson. Rabbi Israel asked, what did he mean by saying that he did not want to enter paradise before the coming of the Messiah? Rabbi Yitzhak replied, in the psalm we read, we have thought on thy loving kindness, Elohim, in the midst of thy temple. My reading of this verse is this: we thought of Elohim. Your loving kindness is in the midst of your temple. The name Elohim refers to the divine attribute of rigor. So, when we think of our troubles here, seeing in them only the divine attribute of rigor, or Elohim. But there, in the midst of thy temple, everyone who comes, if only to the threshold, knows that everything there is the loving kindness of God. The vision of the vegetable vendor. Rabbi Yitzhak of Neskij, the son of Rabbi Mordecai of Neskij, told this story. On the day before the rabbi of Apt suddenly fell ill and died, an old woman who sold vegetables in the marketplace said to her neighbor, this morning at dawn, I don't know whether I was awake or dreaming, I saw my husband, may he rest in peace, who has been dead these many years. I saw him rush past without looking at me. Then I burst into tears and cried to him, first you go and leave me to a miserable life with my orphaned children, and now you don't even look at me. But he kept on running and didn't turn to give me a glance. As I sat there crying, I saw him coming back. He stopped and said, I couldn't take any time off before. We had to fumigate the road and cleanse the air, because the Tzaddikim from the land of Israel cannot stand the air here, and they will soon be coming to receive the rabbi of Apt and escort him to the other side. Isn't that a fine story? The grave in Tiberias. This tale is told. Once, the rabbi of Apt sat deep in thought. He looked bewildered and a little sad. When his Hasidim asked whether anything was troubling him, he said, up to now, during my soul's every sojourn on earth, I occupied some post of honor in Israel, but this time I have none. At that very moment, a messenger from the land of Israel arrived and handed the rabbi an official letter. In it was stated that the Palestinian community, made up of emigrants from Volhynia, whose seat was in Tiberias, nominated him their head. The rabbi of Apt had a feast prepared to celebrate his happiness. Then he gave the messenger a sum of money for the purpose of acquiring a plot of ground for him beside the grave of the prophet Hosea, and of the same size. The night Rabbi Abraham Yehoshua died, a knocking was heard at the window of the Volhynia meeting house in Tiberias. Go out and escort the rabbi of Apt to his eternal rest, it said. When the caretaker opened the door, he saw a bier being borne through the air. Thousands of souls were swarming around it. He followed it to the cemetery and watched them lower the body into the grave. Menahem Mendel of Raimanov. The Song of Praise. The only way young Mendel could manage to travel from his home to the city where Rabbi Elimelech lived was to hire himself out as servant to a coachman. His duties included watching the carriage and the horses during the stops on the journey. It was a bitterly cold day. The driver and his passengers were warming themselves in the inn, eating and drinking. Rabbi Mendel, in his thin coat and his shoes full of holes, walked back and forth beside the carriage and rubbed his hands. Praise be to the Creator, he sang to himself, that I am cold. Praise be to the Creator that I am hungry. He hopped from one foot to the other and sang his song of praise as though it were a dance tune. A guest coming toward him from the inn saw and heard him and was amazed. Young man, said he, what are you mumbling to yourself? Mendel answered, I am thanking God that I am in good health and can be so enormously hungry. But why don't you eat until you are full? Asked the man. Mendel thought this over. You have to have money for that, he said. The man called a servant to watch the carriage took Mendel into the inn, and had food and a warm drink brought to him. Then he saw to it that he got sturdy shoes and a short sheepskin coat of the sort the village Jews wear. When Mendel reached Lizensk, he immediately went to Rabbi Elimelech's house, and so quickly that the servants did not notice him, walked into the room of the Tzaddik, who was sitting over a book, absorbed in the profundities of the teachings. His son Eleazar motioned to the unmannerly stranger to go and wait outside until his presence would not disturb the Tzaddik in his studies. But Rabbi Elimelech had already looked up. He took his son by the arm and said, almost singing, as though he were chanting a song of praise, "Lazar, Lazar, what do you want of that little Jew? Why, sparks of fire are flying all around his head." Barter. Rabbi Mendel's wife's parents kept urging their daughter to get a divorce from a husband who turned away from this world things and whose inefficiency in business only equaled his dislike for it. When she refused, they put out the couple, who up to this time had been living with them, as was customary. Then the two were in bitter need. Occasionally, with the cook's connivance, the woman managed to steal a few provisions from her father's kitchen, or a few faggots from her father's cellar. But once, when her parents were away on a trip and the tradesman refused to give her anything more on credit, she could not bring Rabbi Mendel, who was sitting over his books in the house of study, a thing to eat for 3 days. On the third day, she ventured to cross the baker's threshold one more time. He turned her away. Silently, she left the shop. But he followed her and offered her bread and other food, as much as she could carry, if she, on her part, would promise him her share in the world to come. She hesitated only an instant. Then she accepted his offer. When she entered the house of study, she saw her husband sitting in his seat. He was almost unconscious, but the book was gripped firmly in both his hands. She spread the cloth, served him, and watched him while he ate. He looked up, for never before had she remained. They looked at each other. When their eyes met, she saw he knew what she had done. And then she saw that at that moment she had received a new share in the coming world. The hungry child. Once, when there was not a piece of bread in Rabbi Mendel's house, his son ran to him crying and complained his hunger was so great he could bear it no longer. "Your hunger is not so great as all that," said his father, "for otherwise I should have something to quiet it." The boy slunk off without a word. But before he reached the door, the rabbi saw a small coin lying on the table. "I wronged you," he called out. "You are really very hungry indeed." The spoon. Rabbi Elimelech's servant once forgot a spoon for Rabbi Mendel, who was a guest at Rabbi Elimelech's table. Everyone ate except Rabbi Mendel. The Tzaddik observed this and asked, "Why aren't you eating?" "I have no spoon," said his guest. "Look," said Rabbi Elimelech, "one must know enough to ask for a spoon, and a plate too, if need be." Rabbi Mendel took the word of his teacher to heart. From that day on, his fortunes were on the mend. In youth, Rabbi Mendel once boasted to his teacher, Rabbi Elimelech, that evenings he saw the angel who rolls away the light before the darkness, and mornings the angel who rolls away the darkness before the light. "Yes," said Rabbi Elimelech, "in my youth I saw that too. Later on you don't see those things anymore." The call. A man came to Rabbi Mendel and begged him to confirm him in the feeling that he had the call to be a rabbi. He said he felt that he had reached that rung and was capable of pouring blessings upon Israel. For a time, the Tzaddik looked at him in silence. Then he said, "When I was young, the voice of a man used to wake me every night at midnight. It would call to me, 'Mendel, rise for the lamentations at midnight.' I had grown accustomed to the voice, but one night I heard another voice call. 'Rabbi Mendel,' said the voice, 'rise for the lamentations at midnight.' I was terrified. I trembled until dawn, and all day I was seized by terror. 'Perhaps I heard wrong,' I said to calm my heart. But the next night the voice again said, 'Rabbi Mendel.' For 40 days afterward, I mortified my flesh and prayed without ceasing that the voice be taken from me. But the gates of heaven remained closed to me, and the voice kept calling. So I resigned myself. The Testament. Before he died, Rabbi Elimelech laid his hands on the heads of his 4 favorite disciples and divided what he owned among them. To the seer of Lublin, he gave his eyes power to see. To Abraham, Yehoshua, his lips power to pronounce judgment. To Israel of Koznitz, his heart's power to pray. But to Mendel, he gave his spirit's power to guide. Nothing to offer. After Rabbi Elimelech's death, a number of his younger disciples agreed to go to Rabbi Mendel, who at that time was still living in Preistig. They arrived at his house on a Friday afternoon. On the table were 2 Sabbath loaves made of rye flour and 2 small candles in crude clay holders. They asked his wife where he was and were told that he had not yet returned from the ritual bath. Naphtali, later the rabbi of Ropchitz, at once went to the city and bought all the necessary things: a white tablecloth, real white Sabbath loaves, both large and small, and tall candles in handsome holders. The table was set properly, and they all sat down to it. When Rabbi Mendel entered the room, they all rose to show him that they accepted him as their father. He fixed one after the other with a long, searching gaze. Then he said, "If you bring the right things with you, you may come even to me, who have nothing to offer." Refusal. On the eve of the New Year, Rabbi Mendel entered the house of prayer. He surveyed the many people who had come together from near and far. "A fine crowd," he called out to them. "But I want you to know that I cannot carry you all on my shoulders. Every one of you must work for himself." Women's wear. The first ruling Rabbi Mendel had made in Raimanov was that the daughters of Israel should not parade up and down the streets in gay-colored, lavishly trimmed dresses. From then on, the Jewish girls and women of Raimanov faithfully followed the Tzadik's orders. But the daughter-in-law of the wealthiest man in town, the wife he had just fetched for his son from the capital of the district, refused to let her finery turn yellow in her chest, with none to admire it. When Rabbi Mendel saw her strutting up and down the main street, dressed in her best, he sent for the most mischievous gutter snipes and gave them permission to call after the woman whatever went through their heads. The rich man, who was one of the pillars of the community, came to the rabbi in a rage and tried to make clear to him that his ruling was contrary to the Torah. For Ezra the scribe had included in his ordinances permission for traders to travel from place to place, so that the daughters of Israel might adorn themselves. "Do you think," asked Rabbi Mendel, "that Ezra meant them to parade up and down the streets? Do you think he did not know that a woman can receive the honors due her nowhere save in her home?" Weights and measures. On the last day of every month, Rabbi Mendel had the weights and measures in every Jewish shop examined. Once in the place of business of a rich man, his agents discovered a liquid measure which had been declared invalid. The proprietor asserted that he no longer used it for measuring. "Even if you only use it for a spittoon, the law forbids you to have it on your premises," said one of the investigators. Rabbi Hirsch, the faithful servant of Rabbi Mendel, whom the Tzaddik had secretly chosen for his successor. He hurled the measure to the ground and smashed it with his foot. "Is Saul also among the prophets?" sneered the merchant. "Are you already competent to lay down the law?" When Hirsch returned to the Tzaddik, he reported that everything was in good order, but the others told Rabbi Mendel what had happened. He immediately sent out a crier to hammer on the doors of all the people and summon them to a sermon in the house of prayer. But he forbade the man to knock at the rich merchant's door. The congregation assembled. Rabbi Mendel preached on the subject of just weights and measures. Only then did the rich man, who had come along with the others, realize why he had not been summoned. The fact that the rabbi was speaking about him to everyone but him wounded him to the heart. After the sermon, he went up to Rabbi Mendel and begged to be given a penance and pardoned. Concerning hospitality, a man came and complained to Rabbi Mendel that he could not fulfill the commandment to be hospitable because his wife did not like to have guests. And whenever he brought people to the house, it gave rise to quarrels, which threatened his domestic peace. The rabbi said, "Our sages say, welcoming guests is a greater virtue than welcoming the divine presence." This may sound exaggerated to us, but we must understand it properly. It is said that when there is peace between husband and wife, the divine presence rests in their minds. That is why welcoming guests is described as being more important than welcoming the divine presence. Even if hospitality destroys the peace that exists between a man and his wife, the commandment to be hospitable is still the more important. Guest loaves. During a period when the cost of living was very high, Rabbi Mendel noticed that the many needy people whom he entertained as guests in his house received smaller loaves than usual. He gave orders to make the loaves larger than before, since loaves were intended to adjust to hunger and not to the price. The leaky roof. Government officials came to Rymanov to requisition a house in which to store provisions for the army. The only house suitable for their purpose proved to be the house of prayer of the Jewish congregation. When the heads of the community heard of this, they did not know what to do and consulted Rabbi Mendel in great dismay. But one of them recalled a circumstance which might lead to a change in the decision. The roof of the house of prayer had been leaking for quite a while, and if a heavy rain were to fall, the provisions would certainly have to be stored elsewhere. Then the decision to make a storehouse of the house of prayer is just, said the rabbi, for it is a judgment upon your idleness and neglect. Have the roof mended at once. The roof was mended the same day. From that time on, nothing further was heard concerning the decision of the officials. Only after some weeks did the people of Rymanov hear that on that very day the officials had decided in favor of another town. At court, when the rabbis of Apt and Rymanov were staying with the seer of Lublin in the city of Landshut where he lived before going to Lublin, his enemies denounced his guests to the authorities, who had them jailed. They decided that since Rabbi Mendel could speak the best German, and German was the language used in the court, he was to do the talking for all when they were examined. The judge asked, "What is your business?" The rabbi of Rymanov replied, "Serving the king." "What king?" "The king over all kings." "And why did you two strangers come to Landshut?" "To learn greater zeal in serving from this man here." End quote. "And why do you wear white robes?" "It is the color of our office." The judge said, "We have no quarrel with this sort of people," and he dismissed them. The two lights. Rabbi Mendel of Rymanov was asked, "Why cannot two Tzaddikim have their seats in the same city?" He replied, "Tzaddikim are like the lights up in heaven. When God created the two great lights of heaven, he placed both in the firmament, each to do its own special service. Ever since, they have been friends. The great light does not boast of being great, and the small light is content with being small. And so it was in the days of our sages. There was a whole sky full of stars, large stars and small stars, and they lived together in all brotherliness. Not so the Tzaddikim of our day. Now, no one wants to be a small light and bow to a greater, so it is better for each to have his own firmament all for himself." The acceptance of the Torah. One morning on the first day of the Feast of Weeks, before the reading from the Torah, Rabbi Mendel left the prayer room to go into his own room. After a time, he returned to the prayer room and said, "When Mount Sinai was raised to hang above you like a huge hollow bell, you were compelled to accept the law. Today I release you from this compulsion and from this responsibility. You are once more free to choose." Then all cried aloud, "Now too we accept the Torah." A disciple of the rabbi of Lublin, who happened to be there because he had been unable to go as usual to his teacher over the holidays, added the following whenever he told this story: "And all their impurities melted away as they had that time at Mount Sinai. It is prizest." At a time of goodwill. Rabbi Mendel was asked, "On the Sabbath, when we say the afternoon prayer, why do we speak the words of the psalm? And as for me, may my prayer unto thee, O Lord, be at a time of goodwill." He replied, "Because the will of the Most High to create the world for the good of his creatures already existed on the afternoon of the Sabbath before the first day of creation." Every Sabbath at this same time, it is as if that original will again wakes. And so we pray that this time before the Sabbath draws to a close, the will to do good to his creatures may manifest itself once more. A day's portion. Rabbi Kalman of Krakow asked Rabbi Hirsch the servant, Rabbi Mendel's successor, "What is your way in the service of prayer?" He replied, "My way was shown to me by my holy teacher. May he merit life in the world to come. Concerning manna, it is written, 'And the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day.' Every day has its own portion of prayer, and one must concentrate on the particular meaning of each portion every day." Belief and trust. Rabbi Mendel of Rymanov was asked how to interpret the words God added when he told Moses that the people were to gather a day's portion of manna every day, that I may prove them whether they will walk in my law or not. He explained, "If you ask even a very simple man whether he believes that God is the only God in the world, he will give the emphatic answer. How can you ask? Do not all creatures know that he is the only one in the world? But should you ask him if he trusts that the Creator will see to it that he has all that he needs, he will be taken aback, and after a while he will say, 'Well, I guess I haven't reached that rung yet,' with second soul braid. But in reality, belief and trust are linked, and one cannot exist without the other. He who firmly believes trusts completely. But if anyone, God forbid, has not perfect confidence in God, his belief will be faint as well. That is why God says, 'I will cause to rain bread from heaven for you.' That means I can cause bread to rain from heaven for you. But he who goes in the path of my teachings, and that means he who has belief in me, and that means he who has trust in me, gathers a day's portion every day, and does not worry about the morrow." The Lord of the Manor and the Peasant. At the Seder, on the night of Passover, Rabbi Mendel of Rymanov liked to tell the following story after the song about one only kid. A peasant stood in the marketplace and offered a calf for sale. Along came the lord of the manor and asked, "What do you want for that dog?" Said the peasant, "That's a calf and not a dog." Each insisted that he was right, and so they wrangled for a while, until the Lord gave the peasant a box on the ear, saying, "Here's something to help you remember that when the Lord say it's a dog, it is a dog." The peasant replied, "I shall remember." Sometime later, a friend of the peasant came running into the village which adjoined the manor. He was all out of breath and shouted for the firemen. It seemed that where he lived, quite a distance away, the community threshing barn and the house of the mayor, who was popular for miles around, had caught fire. The entire squad of firemen set out and took all their equipment with them. In the meantime, the peasant set fire to the four corners of the manor, and it burned down. A few weeks later, when he heard that the Lord was going to rebuild his house, he disguised himself, pretended to be an architect, and told the Lord he would draw up a plan. This he at once proceeded to do, for he was a clever peasant. They sat over the plan, calculated the amount of wood necessary for the building, and decided to go into the forest, which belonged to the Lord, to measure the circumference of the trees which were suitable for lumber. When they reached the forest, the peasant was contemptuous of the trees standing at the edge. "There were better trees farther along," said the Lord. They walked on, keeping a sharp lookout, until they were right in the middle of the forest. There the architect stopped and pointed enthusiastically to a giant of a tree, saying it was so-and-so, many ells around, and would make splendid planks. "That's a lot more ells than you think," said the Lord. The architect went up to the tree and put his arm about the trunk. "Just as I figured," he cried. Then the Lord went up to the tree and did just as the other before him. The peasant pulled out his measuring cord, tied the Lord to the trunk by his arms and legs, gave him a sound drubbing, and said, "This is the first reminder, so that you'll know when the peasant says it's a calf, it is a calf and not a dog." Then he went his way, but the Lord howled for hours until someone happened along and cut his bonds. When the Lord got home, he felt ill and went to bed. He grew worse from day to day and had doctor after doctor called, but none of them could give him any relief. At that time, a rumor spread through the neighboring town that a great miracle healer would stop there for a day in the course of his travels and would heal all the sick who came to consult him. Most worries. Soon after, the peasant disguised as a doctor arrived in the town and gave out very good advice, for he was a clever peasant. The Lord, who had heard of him, had him summoned to his bedside and promised to pay him whatever he asked if he would cure him. The doctor came, took one look at the patient, and said peremptorily to the persons around him, "You must leave me alone with him and not disturb me in my rather severe but infallible cure, not even if he should scream." As soon as they were gone, he bolted the door and gave the Lord another first-rate drubbing. Those who stood outside heard the pitiful shrieks and said, "There's a real fellow for you. He is doing a thorough job." But the peasant was saying to the Lord, "This is a second reminder, so you'll be sure to know once and for all. When a peasant says it's a calf, it is a calf and not a dog." Then he went off with such ease and self-confidence that no one even thought of stopping him. When the Lord recovered from his illness and his bruises, he set out to find the peasant, but did not succeed, for the latter had not only dyed his skin and changed the cut of his hair, but had also assumed manners and gestures that were so different that he was quite unrecognizable. Early in the morning on the next market day, he saw the Lord sitting in his coach close to the marketplace, which was still almost empty, peering in all directions. The peasant turned to an acquaintance of his who had come with his horse and had the reputation of being a good rider, and said, "Do you want to do me a favor, friend?" "Surely," said the other. "If it isn't anything too difficult." "It is. All you have to do," answered the peasant, "is to ride up to that gentleman in the coach, bend down and whisper to him. If the peasant says it's a calf, it is a calf. Then ride off as fast as you can, and don't stop until you have left those who will pursue you far behind. After that, meet me at the inn you know which, and I'll have them serve you the best old plum brandy ever." His friend did as he had been told. When the Lord heard his words, he started up, for he was sure the man he had been looking for was there in front of him. He shouted to his coachman and servant to unhitch the horses and make after the fellow. They mounted the horses and galloped off. When the peasant saw the Lord alone in his coach, he went up to him, boxed his ears soundly, and said, "This is the third reminder, and now I guess you have learned that when the peasant says it's a calf, it is a calf and not a dog." Then he went off to the inn. And the calf, so Rabbi Mendel ended his tale, at every Seder the calf remained a calf and never became a dog. And when the children asked, "And what was the name of the clever peasant?" Rabbi Mendel answered, "Michael." When they asked, "What was the name of the bad lord?" he said, "Samael." And when they asked, "What was the name of the calf that never became a dog?" he replied, "That is the well-known calf, Israel." Roads. Rabbi Mendel often complained. As long as there were no roads, you had to interrupt a journey at nightfall. Then you had all the leisure in the world to recite psalms at the inn, to open a book, and to have a good talk with one another. But nowadays you can ride on these roads day and night, and there is no peace anymore. Fulfilling the law. A disciple asked Rabbi Mendel of Raimanov, "The Talmud says that Abraham fulfilled all the commandments. How is that possible, since they had not yet been given?" "You know," said the rabbi, "that the commandments of the Torah correspond to the bones, and the prohibitions to the sinews of man. Thus the entire law includes the entire body of man. But Abraham had made every part of his body so pure and holy that each of itself fulfilled the command intended for it." The heart. Rabbi Mendel of Raimanov used to say that during the time he was silently reciting the 18 benedictions, all the people who had ever asked him to pray to God in their behalf would pass through his mind. Someone once asked how that was possible, since there was surely not enough time. Rabbi Mendel replied, "The need of every single one leaves a trace in my heart. In the hour of prayer I open my heart and say, 'Lord of the world, read what is written here.' The pause. Rabbi Hirsch, the servant, related, "When my holy teacher recited the penitential prayers at the reader's desk on the day before the new year, he would always pause after saying the prayer with the phrase, 'When everyone has truly turned to you with all his heart and soul,' and would stand a moment in silence before he resumed. Many thought that during this time he busied himself with the permutations of the names of God, but his intimates knew he only waited until he saw that everyone in the congregation was determined to turn with all his heart and soul." The sounds of work. This question was put to Rabbi Mendel. The scriptures say that when Moses was told that the people were bringing far too many offerings for the building of the sanctuary in the wilderness, he issued the command that no one henceforth was to work at the sanctuary. How does that follow? All Moses had to do was to command that no further offerings be brought. Rabbi Mendel expounded, "It is well known that those who worked at the sanctuary were most holy men, and that their work had a holy effect. When one of them struck the anvil with his hammer, and another split wood with his axe, the sounds echoed in the hearts of all those who heard, and the people were driven by a holy desire to bring more than was needful. That is why Moses bade the workers stop their work." The disciples band together. Rabbi Mendel's disciples formed an association. They wrote a charter, which began with these words, "We wish to found an association of comrades who seek the truth and strive to be righteous and humble, who strive to turn to God with a whole heart, with a heart rendered pure, so that we may no longer be barred by a wall from His holiness." Whenever they made a new resolution as to how they should conduct themselves, they inscribed it on the roll, which began with the above charter. One of their resolutions read, "To beware of untoward words, concerning which our holy rabbi has said that their utterance is a violation of the commandment, 'Thou shalt not murder.'" Rabbi Mendel's utterance, which is here cited, was, "Every word has a perfect shape of its own, and he who casts the sound of the word to the demons is sinning against it, like one who rises against his neighbor and slays him." Ended. The Ark of the Covenant and its carriers. Rabbi Mendel said, "When a man wants to serve God in the right way and does not succeed, walls rise up before him. His prayer lacks tone, his learning light. Then his heart rises up against him, and he comes to the Zadok as one whom his own heart has cast out, and stands trembling, waiting for the Zadok to help him. Then his own humility makes the Zadok humble as well. For he who is to give help sees the bowed and fervent soul of him who has come for help, and thinks, 'He is better than I.' And at that instant, the Zadok is lifted to the very heights by his service, and has the power to loosen that which is bound." To this we may apply the phrase, "The Ark of the Covenant carried its carriers." They blessed each other. Rabbi Fivish of Zebaraj once came to Rabbi Mendel in order to spend the Sabbath near him. On Sunday, when he took his farewell, he wept and said, "I am 74 years old, and I still have not truly turned to God." Weeping, Rabbi Mendel replied, "That troubles me too." Then they decided to bless one another with the blessing that they might be able to accomplish the true turning. The ultimate joy. Soon after the death of Rabbi Mendel's wife, his daughter also died. People whispered to one another not to tell him of it just yet, but when his son-in-law entered the house of prayer weeping, while the rabbi was saying the morning prayer, he at once realized what had happened. He finished the prayer of benedictions and said, "Lord of the world, you took my wife from me, but I still had my daughter and could rejoice in her. Now you have taken her from me too. Now I have no one left to rejoice in except you alone. So I shall rejoice in you." And he said the additional prayer in a transport of joy. Zevi Hirsch of Raimanov. Genealogy. When the rabbi of Rizhin betrothed his grandson to the daughter of Rabbi Hirsch of Raimanov, before the writing of the marriage contract, he said, "It is the custom in my family to recite our genealogy at the time of betrothal, and that is what I shall now do. My grandfather's father was Rabbi Ber, my grandfather was Rabbi Abraham the Angel, and my father, Rabbi Shalom Shachna. He had given merely the names of the great Maggid, his son, and his grandson, without adding the usual honorary titles. Then he said to Rabbi Hirsch, "Now it is your turn to tell us from whom you are descended." Rabbi Hirsch replied, "My father and mother left this earth when I was 10 years old, and so I did not know them well enough to be able to speak of them, but I have been told that they were upright and honest folk. When they died, my relatives apprenticed me to a tailor. I stayed with him for 5 years, and even though I was very young, I worked well. I was careful not to ruin what was new and to repair what was old." "The marriage is agreeable to both sides," cried the rabbi of Rizhin. Bed making. One of the duties of Rabbi Menahem Mendel of Raimanov's servant was making his bed, and he never let anyone else do this in his stead. Now, when young Zevi Hirsch quitted the tailor's trade and was taken into the Zadok's house as a stoker, he begged the servant to let him make the Zadok's bed. But the man refused, saying that the rabbi would certainly notice that another's hand had performed this service. Once, however, the servant was called away before evening, and since he had to go at once, he transferred his duties to the young stoker and gave him minute directions on how to make the bed. Hirsch promised to do exactly as he had been told. When Rabbi Mendel rose the following morning, he called his servant and asked who had made the bed. Trembling, the man answered and begged forgiveness. "I never knew," said the Zadok, "that one could sleep so sweetly. From now on, the stoker is to make my bed." The power to cleanse. Rabbi Nathan Yehuda, the son of Rabbi Mendel of Raimanov, told this story. "The morning after Rabbi Hirsch the servant had celebrated his wedding, I entered the house of study and found the bridegroom cleaning out the place with the same devotion to his task as ever. I was annoyed, went to my father, and said, 'Father, it isn't right for your servant to ignore his marriage and do such lowly work on the 7 days of the feast.' My father replied, 'You have made me happy, my son.' I was much troubled as to how I should be able to pray today if Zevi Hirsch the servant did not clean the house of study himself. For when he does the cleaning, he drives out all the demons, and the air grows pure, and then that house is a good place to pray in." On that very day, my father accepted Rabbi Hirsch as his disciple. The loftiest prayer. Rabbi Hirsch once complained to his teacher that whenever he prayed, he saw fiery letters and words flash before his eyes. "These," said Rabbi Mendel, "are the mystical concentrations of our sacred master, Rabbi Isaac Luria. So what cause have you to complain? But I want to pray, concentrating only on the meaning of the words," answered Rabbi Hirsch. "What you have in mind," said Rabbi Mendel, "is a very high rung, which only one man in a whole generation can reach, that of having learned all secret wisdom, and then praying like a little child." After the death of his teacher, there are many reports on how Rabbi Hirsch became the successor of his teacher and master. One of them says that Rabbi Mendel dreamed that the angel Metatron, the prince of the innermost chamber, led Hirsch the servant to the Zadok's chair. Afterward, the Zadok observed that Hirsch saw the souls of the dead who came to him for redemption as clearly as the Zadok himself. This lessened his uneasiness, yet from that time on he no longer permitted the servant to live in his house and perform personal services for him. The only thing he allowed him to do was to help him put on his phylacteries, for Hirsch had begged this of him as a very great favor. According to another account, Rabbi Mendel's 2 sons drove to Rabbi Naphtali of Ropchitz after their father's death to ask him to decide which of them should become his father's successor. They took Rabbi Hirsch with them as their servant, and were already agreed that whichever of them became the rabbi would take the servant into his house. On the way, they were accosted by a villager who had been among their father's Hasidim. When he heard of his master's death, he wanted to hand the note of request he had with him to them, because they were Rabbi Mendel's sons. But they did not wish to take it, since neither of them had yet been ordained rabbi. So the younger son gently told the man to give the note to Rabbi Hirsch, and the man did so in the simplicity of his heart. They were amazed and somewhat confounded to see Rabbi Hirsch take the note with a matter-of-fact air. When they came to Rabbi Naphtali, he greeted Rabbi Hirsch with the title of Rabbi and gave him the place of honor. They say that a group of Hasidim wanted to elect as their rabbi Nathan Yehuda, Rabbi Mendel's eldest son, but he not only refused, but went away to foreign parts for a considerable period of time. The renewed soul. Rabbi Hirsch once said to his Hasidim, "When a man rises in the morning and sees that God has returned his soul to him and that he has become a new creature, he should turn singer and sing to God." My holy master, Rabbi Menahem Mendel, had a Hasid who, whenever he came to the words in the morning prayer, "My God, the soul you have placed in me is pure," danced and broke into a song of praise. The perfection of the Torah. A woman once came to Rabbi Hirsch, her eyes streaming with tears, and complained that she had been the victim of a miscarriage of justice in the rabbinical court. The Tzaddik summoned the judges and said, "Show me the source from which you derived your verdict, for it seems to me that there has been some error." Together they looked up the passage in the book Breastplate of Judgment on which the verdict had been based, and discovered that there had indeed been a misinterpretation. One of the judges asked the rabbi how he had known beforehand that there had been an error. He answered, "It is written, the law of the Lord is perfect, restoring the soul." Had the verdict been in accordance with the true law, the woman could never have wept as she did. The quintessence of the Torah. Before his death, Rabbi Hirsch of Raimanov repeated over and over the words in the Song of Moses, "A God of faithfulness and without iniquity." Then he said, "The quintessence of the Holy Torah is to know that He is a God of faithfulness and that therefore there can be no iniquity." You may ask, if this is so, then why the whole Torah? It would have been enough for God to say that one verse at Sinai. The answer is, no one can grasp this one truth until he has learned and fulfilled the whole Torah. From the school of Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, Yuri of Strelisk. With a quorum of 10 pulpits, when, after visiting with his teacher Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin, Rabbi Uri returned to Luau, he did not have a quorum of 10 needed for community prayer, but prayed alone during an entire year. One day, while he was studying the Book of Splendor, he came to a passage in praise of those who listened to the reading of the Torah, and decided from then on to go to the house of prayer every Sabbath to hear the Torah read. But the first Sabbath he listened, he noticed that they were not reading what was really written in the Torah, so he did not go the following week. But soon after this, he again found a passage in the Book of Splendor in praise of those who pray together with the community. He assembled 10 men to pray with him, and said to himself, "Even if God commanded me to pray with a quorum of 10 pulpits, I would pray with them." End quote. Acceptable offering. Rabbi Uri said, "It is written, and Abel brought, also he brought his own self. Only when a man offers himself as well is his offering acceptable." Before going to pray. Every morning before going to pray, Rabbi Uri saw to his house and said his last goodbye to his wife and children. The secret prayer. This is how Rabbi Uri expounded the words of the prayer. "May he who knows that which is hidden accept our call for help and listen to our cry." We know very well how we ought to pray, and still we cry for help in the need of the moment. The soul wishes us to cry out in spiritual need, but we are not able to express what the soul means. And so we pray that God may accept our call for help, but also that He who knows that which is hidden may hear the silent cry of the soul. To walk hidden with God. Rabbi Uri said, "It is written, and to walk hidden with thy God. Know that angels stand, ceaselessly they stand, each on his own rung. But we move from rung to rung. For angels are not garmented in flesh. They cannot remain hidden while they perform their service. And no matter on what rung they stand, they are always manifest." But man on this earth is clothed in flesh, and can hide within this body of his, and so hidden from sight, he can move from rung to rung. There and here, Rabbi Uri taught. We read in the psalm, "If I ascend up into heaven, thou art there. If I make my bed in the netherworld, here thou art. When I consider myself great and think I can touch the sky, I discover that God is the far away there, and the higher I reach, the farther away he is. But if I make my bed in the depths, if I bow my soul down to the netherworld, he is here with me. Open thou mine eyes." Once at table, Rabbi Uri said the words of the psalm with great fervor. "Open thou mine eyes, that I may behold wondrous things out of thy law," and expounded them in this way. We know that God created a great light, that man might be able to look from one end of the world to the other, and no curtain might separate the sight of the eyes from that which is seen. But then God hid this light. That is why David pleads, "Open thou mine eyes." For it is really not the eye, with its white and its pupil, that produces sight. The eye has sight, because the power of God lends sight to the eye. But a curtain prevents the eye from seeing that which is distant in the same way as it sees that which is near. David pleaded that this curtain be removed, that he might behold the wonder of all that is. For, he says, "Out of thy law," that is, according to thy law, "I see that no separation is intended." Where? Rabbi Uri once said to the Hasidim, who had come together in Strelisk, "You journey to me, and where do I journey? I journey and journey continually to that place where I can cling to God." The wish. A Tzaddik who was visiting Rabbi Uri asked him, "Why is it that none of your Hasidim is rich?" "I shall show you why," answered the rabbi of Strelisk. "Call in any one of the people who are in the anteroom." His visitor did so. "This is a season of grace," said Rabbi Uri to the Hasid who had entered. "Whatever wish you utter now shall be granted to you." Logu knowing, end quote. "If I may make a wish," said the man in a voice both shy and burning, "I wish that every morning I may be able to say the prayer, 'Blessed be he who spake, and the world came into being just like our rabbi says it.'" Generation after generation. Rabbi Uri said, "One does not help only one's own generation. Generation after generation, David pours enthusiasm into somber souls. Generation after generation, Samson arms weak souls with the strength of heroes. Each his own." Rabbi Uri said, "David could compose the Psalms. And what can I do? I can recite the Psalms." Letters and souls. Rabbi Uri said, "The myriads of letters in the Torah correspond to the myriads of souls in Israel. If one single letter is left out of the Torah, it becomes unfit for use. If one single soul is left out of the union of Israel, the divine presence will not rest upon it. Like the letters, so the souls must unite and form a union. But why is it forbidden for one letter in the Torah to touch its neighbor? Because every soul in Israel must have hours when it is alone with its Maker." The growing tree. Rabbi Uri taught, "Man is like a tree. If you stand in front of a tree and watch it incessantly to see how it grows and to see how much it has grown, you will see nothing at all. But tend to it at all times, prune the runners, and keep the vermin from it, and all in good time it will come into its growth. It is the same with man. All that is necessary is for him to overcome his obstacles, and he will thrive and grow. But it is not right to examine him every hour to see how much has been added to his growth." End quote. Into freedom. Tradition has it that until Rabbi Uri recited the benediction of separation at the close of the Sabbath and separated the Sabbath from the weekday, the keys of hell were in his hand, and souls who had been freed from torment for the duration of the holy day of rest could fly about in the world unhindered. The sign. For a number of hours, Rabbi Uri lay unconscious in the agony of death. His favorite disciple, Rabbi Yehuda Zevi, opened the door from time to time, looked at the dying man, and closed the door again. At last he entered the room and went up to the bed. The next moment the Hasidim who had followed him in saw their master stretch out one last time and die. Later, when they asked Rabbi Yehuda how he had known that death was imminent, he replied, "It is written, 'For man shall not see me and live.' I saw that he saw." Testimony of the Disciple. The rabbi of Kalev once asked Rabbi Yehuda Zevi to tell him words of the teachings which he had heard from his teacher, Rabbi Uri. "The teachings of my teacher," said Rabbi Yehuda Zevi, "are like manna that enters the body but does not leave it." But when the rabbi of Kalev would not stop pressing him, Rabbi Yehuda Zevi tore open the coat over his breast and cried, "Look into my heart. There you will learn what my teacher is." Yehuda Zevi of Stretton and his son Abraham of Stretton. Men can meet. In the course of a journey, Rabbi Yehuda Zevi of Stretton learned that Rabbi Shimon of Yaroslav was traveling the same road from the opposite direction. He got out of his carriage and went to meet him. Now Rabbi Shimon had heard of Rabbi Yehuda Zevi's coming, got out of his carriage, and went toward him. They greeted each other like brothers. Then Rabbi Yehuda Zevi said, "Now I understand the meaning of the popular saying, 'Men can meet, but mountains never.' When one man considers himself just a human being, pure and simple, and the other does so too, they can meet. But if the one considers himself a lofty mountain, and the other thinks the same, then they cannot meet." A pregnancy. Rabbi Yehuda Zevi said, "When a man grows aware of a new way in which to serve God, he should carry it around with him secretly and without uttering it for 9 months, as though he were pregnant with it, and let others know of it only at the end of that time, as though it were a birth." The Lord is God. Rabbi Yehuda Zevi said, "It is written, 'Unto thee it was shown, that thou mightest know that the Lord, He is God. There is none else beside Him.' He who is learned knows that there is really no distinction between the name YHVH, which is translated as the Lord, that is, the attribute of mercy, and the name Elohim, which is translated as God, that is, the attribute of rigor. He knows that in reality, everything is good. That is the secret meaning of the people's cry after Elijah had overcome the prophets of Baal. YHVH is Elohim. Messiah, the son of Joseph. A Hasid told this story. Once Rabbi Yehuda Zevi said to us at table, "Today Messiah, the son of Joseph, will be born in Hungary, and he will become one of the hidden Tzaddikim. And if God lets me live long enough, I shall go there and see him." End quote. 18 years later, the rabbi traveled to the city of Pest and took me with him, along with other Hasidim. We stayed in Pest for several weeks, and not one of us disciples knew why we had come. One day, a youth appeared at the inn. He wore a short coat, and his face was as beautiful as an angel's. Without asking permission, he went straight into the rabbi's room and closed the door behind him. I remembered those words I had heard long ago, kept near the door, and waited to greet him as he came out and asked his blessing. But when hours later he did come out, the rabbi accompanied him to the gate, and when I ran out into the little street, he had vanished. Even now, after so many years, my heart still beats with the living impulse I received from him as he went by. The suffering he took over. During the last 3 years of his life, Rabbi Yehuda Zevi was afflicted with a terrible disease, which caused painful ulcers to break out all over his body. The doctors said that, from what they knew of human fortitude, it was impossible for a man to bear such pain. When one of the rabbi's close friends asked him about this, he said, "When I was young, and one who was sick came to me, I could pray with all the force of my soul that his suffering might be taken from him. Later, the strength of my prayer flagged, and all I could do was to take the suffering upon myself, and so now I bear it." Drugs. A learned but ungenerous man said to Rabbi Abraham of Stretton, "They say that you give people mysterious drugs and that your drugs are effective, Give me one that I may attain to the fear of God." End quote. "I don't know any drug for the fear of God," said Rabbi Abraham. "But if you like, I can give you one for the love of God." "That's even better," cried the other. "Just you give it to me." "It is the love of one's fellow men," answered the Tzaddik. The unity of senses. Rabbi Haim of Zons was surprised when Rabbi Abraham of Stretton, who was visiting him, failed to put sugar in his coffee. When he questioned him about it, Rabbi Abraham said, "It is said, 'There is no unity in my bones because of my sin.' Why is there a division between the powers of the limbs of man that are all wrought out of the same matter? Why can eyes only see and ears only hear? Because of the sin of the first man they are not in harmony. But whoever sets himself right to the very root of his soul, to Adam's sin, will bring unity to his body, and such a man can taste sweetness even with his eyes." Mordecai of Lekovitz and his descendants. The chain. Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz said to his disciples, "The Tzaddik cannot say any words of the teachings unless he first links his soul to the soul of his dead teacher, or to that of his teacher's teacher. Only then is link joined to link, and the teachings flow from Moses to Joshua, from Joshua to the elders, and so on to the Tzaddik's own teacher, and from his teacher to him." The nature of prayer. Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin related, "My teacher, Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz, taught me how to pray. He instructed me as follows: He who utters the word Lord, and in doing so prepares to say of the world, is not speaking as he should at the moment he is saying Lord. He must only think of offering himself up to the Lord, so that even if his soul should leave him with the Lord, and he were not able to add the word world, it would be enough for him that he had been able to say Lord. This is the essence of prayer. In your kingdom. An emissary from the land of Israel, a devout and honest man, feared that great honors would be conferred upon him, for at that time such was the custom with regard to emissaries, and that he might feel satisfaction thereat. So he prayed to God, if that happened, to send him stomach cramps, for the bodily pain would make him forget all about the honors. His prayer was granted. When he arrived in Lekovitz, it was on a Friday. Rabbi Mordecai received him with great honors. Soon after, the emissary was in such pain that he had to lie down and was unable to sit at the Tzaddik's table. But from his bed he could hear the Hasidim in the next room singing, "They shall rejoice in your kingdom," the Tzaddik leading the chorus. The emissary jumped up. His pains had left him, just as he was, without his coat and shoes, wearing only the skull cap on his head. He ran into the room and danced around the table. "Praised be the Lord," he cried, keeping time with the singing, "who has brought me to the right place." I heard it. "They shall rejoice in your kingdom, not in a wife and children, not in sheep and cattle, but in your kingdom. Praise be the Lord that I have come to the right place, but in your kingdom, but in your kingdom." The hole in the lung. Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz once said to himself, "We have heard of a bird that sings his praise of God with such fervor that his body bursts. But I pray and yet I remain whole and sound, so what good are my prayers?" After a time, the great fervor of his praying tore a hole in his lung. The doctors in the town of Wow gave him up, but he said to God, "I did not mean to say only one prayer in that way. I want to go on praying." Then God helped him, and he recovered. When he happened to be in Wow again, and a crowd of Hasidim surrounded his house, a doctor passed by and asked who had arrived. "The rabbi of Lekovitz," they answered. "Is he still alive?" cried the doctor. "Then he certainly must be living without a lung." Miracles. The rabbi of Kobrin said, "We paid no attention to the miracles our teachers worked, and when sometimes a miracle did not come to pass, he gained in our eyes." Against worrying. Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz said, "We must not worry. Only one worry is permissible. A man should worry about nothing but worry." Why the rejoicing? This is what Rabbi Mordecai once said in connection with the verse in the psalm. Rejoice the soul of thy servant. Why the rejoicing? Said he. For unto thee, O Lord, do I lift my soul. It is by rejoicing that I can lift my soul to you. A blessing. Once when Rabbi Mordecai attended the circumcision of the son of his friend Rabbi Asher of Stolin, and they brought him the boy afterward, that he might bless him, he said, May you not fool God, may you not fool yourself, and may you not fool people. A sign for Cain. This is how Rabbi Mordecai expounded the verse. And the Lord set a sign for Cain, lest any finding him should smite him. God gave Cain, the penitent, a sign of strength and holiness, so that no accident he met with should beat his spirit down and disturb him in his work of repentance. Wholesome insolence. A learned old man who was hostile to the Hasidic way once asked Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz, Tell me why it is that so long as a young man learns in the house of study and has nothing to do with the oddities of Hasidim, he is well behaved and has good manners, but as soon as he joins the Hasidim, he grows insolent. The Zadok replied, Haven't you heard about that learned old fellow who has been taking a great deal of time and trouble with mankind from time immemorial? King Solomon called him an old king, and the fact that he learns along with all those who learn proves his learning. Now, when this learned old fellow comes to a timid young man who has nothing but good manners with which to meet people and tries to tempt him to follow him in his ways, the youth does not dare turn him out. But the Hasid, the insolent Hasid, seizes the old fellow in both his arms, presses him close to himself till his ribs crack, and kicks him out of the door. The verse within. Once when Rabbi Mordecai was in the great town of Minsk expounding the Torah to a number of men hostile to his way, they laughed at him. What you say does not explain the verse in the least, they cried. Do you really think, he replied, that I was trying to explain the verse in the book? That doesn't need explanation. I want to explain the verse that is within me. For the joy of others. The Mitnagdim were making fun of the rabbi of Lekovitz on another occasion, but when they laughed, he did nothing but smile and say, God has not created a single creature that does not give joy to others. So I too have been created for the joy of others, for those who are near to my heart, because my nearness is pleasing to them, and for you, because you mock me. The Mitnagdim listened and grew silent and gloomy. Hasid and Mitnagid. A Hasid of the Zadok of Lekovitz had a business partner who was a Mitnagid. The Hasid kept urging him to go to the rabbi with him, but the Mitnagid was obstinate in his refusal. Finally, however, when they happened to be in Lekovitz on business, he let himself be persuaded and agreed to go to the Zadok's for the Sabbath meal. In the course of the meal, the Hasid saw his friend's face light up with joy. Later he asked him about it. When the Zadok ate, he looked as holy as the high priest making the offering, was the reply. After a while, the Hasid went to the rabbi, much troubled in spirit, and wanted to know why the other had seen something on his very first visit, which he, the rabbi's close friend, had not. The Mitnagid must see, the Hasid must believe, answered Rabbi Mordecai. Fraud. Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz busied himself collecting money for the land of Israel, and he himself gave large amounts for this cause. At all times when he rose from his bed in the morning, before morning prayer, after morning prayer, before studying, after studying, before dining and after dining, and so on until evening, he put aside gifts for the land of Israel. When a sum of money had accumulated, he sent it to Rabbi Abraham Kalisker, who at that time was the collector for the land of Israel, and he appended a slip of paper which bore the names of the donors. But since Rabbi Mordecai himself had contributed considerable sums and did not wish anyone to know how large a share of the money was due to him, he added something of what he had given under the name of every other donor listed on the slip. When the list came to Rabbi Abraham's hand, he looked at it, smiled, shook his head, and pointed to one item after another, saying, The rabbi of Lechovitz has something of his own in this. And here there's something more of the rabbi of Lechovitz. Before they. Once when Rabbi Mordecai was saying the verse from the psalm, "But I was brutish and ignorant. I was as a beast before thee," he interrupted himself and cried, "Lord of the world, I want to be ignorant. I want to be brutish, if only I can be before thee." In his father's footsteps. When Rabbi Noah, Rabbi Mordecai's son, assumed the succession after his father's death, his disciples noticed that there were a number of ways in which he conducted himself differently from his father and asked him about this. "I do just as my father did," he replied. "He did not imitate, and I do not imitate." Against hypocrisy. Rabbi Noah of Lechovitz said, "He who works in the service of God deceitfully, what good does it do him? God cannot be fooled, and if you succeed in fooling the people, it will turn out wrong in the end. Whoever tries to fool others only fools himself and keeps on being a fool." I believe. Once, when Rabbi Noah was in his room, he heard how one of his disciples began to recite the principles of faith in the house of study next door, but stopping immediately after the words, "I believe with perfect faith," whispered to himself, "I don't understand that." And then once more, "I don't understand that." The Zadok left his room and went to the house of study. "What is it you do not understand?" he asked. "I don't understand what it's all about," said the man. "I say, I believe. If I really do believe, then how can I possibly sin? But if I do not really believe, why am I telling lies?" "It means," answered the rabbi, "that the words 'I believe' are a prayer, meaning, 'Oh, that I may believe.'" Then the Hasid was suffused with a glow from within. "That is right," he cried. "That is right. Oh, that I may believe. Lord of the world, oh, that I may believe." Light. And God said, "Let there be light." Rabbi Shlomo Hayim of Kaidanov, a grandson of Rabbi Mordecai of Lechovitz, read this verse thus, "And he said, God, let there be light." When a man prays with true fervor, "God, let there be light," then he shall see the light. A Jew. Before he died, Rabbi Shlomo Hayim said to his sons, "You are not to think that your father was a Zadok, a Rebbe, a good Jew. But all the same, I haven't been a hypocrite. I did try to be a Jew." Moshe of Kobrin. The fish in the water. Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin told this story. "When I was a boy, I was once playing with other children on the first day of the month of Elul. Then my elder sister said, 'How can you play today, at the beginning of the month of preparation for the great judgment, when even the fish in the water tremble?' When I heard this, I began to tremble and could not stop for hours. And even now, as it comes back to me, I feel as if I were a fish in water on the first day of the month of Elul, and like the fish, I tremble before the judgment of the world." End quote. Charity. Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin was the son of villagers who labored hard to earn a meager livelihood. When he was a boy, there was a famine in Lithuania. Poor men left the cities with their wives and children and swarmed all over the countryside in search of food. Every day, throngs of hungry people passed through the village in which Moshe's parents lived. His mother ground grain with a hand mill, and each morning she baked bread and distributed it among them. One day, more people came than usual, and there was not enough bread to go around. But the oven was still hot, and the bowls were full of dough. So she quickly took some of the dough, kneaded it, and formed loaves, and slipped them into the oven. Meanwhile, the hungry people complained because they had to wait, and a few insolent fellows among them even railed and cursed. At that, Rabbi Moshe's mother burst into tears. "Do not cry, mother," said the boy. "Let them curse. Just do your work and fulfill the commandment of God. If they praised you and showered blessings on you, it would not perhaps be fulfilled so well." To be a soldier. The rabbi of Kobrin told this story. When I was young, I once spent Purim with my teacher, Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz. In the middle of the meal, he cried, "Today is the day of gifts. The hour for giving has come. Whoever reaches out his hand will get from me whatever strength in the service of God he desires for himself." His disciples asked for a variety of spiritual gifts. Each got what he wanted and kept it. Finally, the rabbi inquired, "Well, Moshe, and what do you want?" I fought down my shyness and replied, "I don't want any gratuitous gift. I want to be a common soldier and serve until I deserve what I get." One thing after another. The rabbi of Kobrin told this story. When my teacher instructed me in one way to serve, I did not want to hear anything more from him until I had done what he had taught me. Not until then did I open up my ears again. The faithful follower. Rabbi Mordecai of Lekovitz was a disciple of Rabbi Shlomo of Karlin. When this rabbi died, his disciples Rabbi Mordecai and Rabbi Asher of Stolin divided the communities of his Hasidim between them. But they could not come to an agreement about Kobrin, which each wanted to include in his own area. Rabbi Mordecai suggested a solution. "I have a Hasid in Kobrin," he said. "Rabbi Moshe, I give you a year to get him to visit you. If he does, you shall have Kobrin. During this year you may do anything you like to attract him to you, and I shall do everything I can to drive him from me." And so it came to pass. The next time Rabbi Moshe went to Lekovitz, his teacher did not greet him. But Moshe neither questioned nor doubted. He was just as devoted to Rabbi Mordecai as before. And even though Rabbi Asher called on him, put himself out to be agreeable, and promised him all kinds of good things in this and the coming world, Moshe remained faithful. And so Kobrin fell to his teacher's share. Angels and humans. The rabbi of Kobrin once looked at the heavens and cried, "Angel, little angel, it is no great trick to be an angel up there in the sky. You don't have to eat and drink, beget children and earn money. Just you come down to earth and worry about eating and drinking, about raising children and earning money, and we shall see if you keep on being an angel. If you succeed, you may boast, but not now." An answer. The rabbi of Kobrin liked to tell the story of the answer General Goen gave to Tsar Nicholas. The general was very old and had served 50 years. At maneuvers which the Tsar attended, the general headed one of the armies. Nicholas rode down the first row and addressed the general. "Well, Gowen, I see you are up and doing. Is your blood still hot?" said Gowen. "Not my blood, your majesty. The service is still hot in me." Books. Once he said, "If it were within my power, I should hide everything written by the Tzaddikim. For when a man has too much knowledge, his wisdom is apt to be greater than his deeds." The end of the matter. The rabbi of Kobrin taught. At the close of Ecclesiastes we read, "The end of the matter, all having been heard, fear God." Now whatever matter you come to the end of, you will always hear this one maxim, fear God. And this one is the whole. There is not a single thing in all the world that does not show you a way to fear God and to serve Him. All is commandment. Up and down. Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin taught, when you walk over a freshly plowed field, furrows alternate with ridges. The way in the service of God is like that. Now you go up, now you go down. Now the evil urge gets a hold on you, now you get a hold on him. Just you see to it that it is you who deal the last blow. For the king, and if one of you should suddenly fall from the heights he has reached, said the rabbi of Kobrin to his Hasidim, and plunge into the abyss, let him not give way to despair. Let him take the yoke of the kingdom of heaven upon him anew, and begin the fight all over again. When the Saxons in our region were fighting the Russians, a Russian soldier got one of them in his power. "Cry for mercy," he shouted, "and I'll let you go." "Nothing doing," the Saxon panted in his face. "It would be a disgrace to my king." The Russian bellowed back, "Cry mercy, or I'll knock off your head." But as the steel cut the artery in his throat, The Saxon repeated, "It would be a disgrace to my king." Simply to act? Before drawing water for the baking of the unleavened bread, the rabbi of Kobrin said to those standing around him, "The king teaches his men all manner of military thrusts and feints, but when they are in the thick of the fight, they throw all they have learned overboard and simply shoot. In respect to the drawing of water, there are also many mysteries to be learned. But when it comes to the action itself, all I know is what I am bidden to do." The dress that did not fit. The wife of a high-ranking officer had told a tailor to make her an expensive dress, but it turned out too tight and he was thrown out of the house in disgrace. The tailor went to the rabbi of Kobrin and begged him to tell him what to do so as not to lose all his customers among the gentry. "Go back," said the Zadok, "and offer to make the dress over. Then rip it up and sew the pieces together again just as they are." The man did as he was told. Timidly and humbly, he made over the dress he had botched in his proud assurance, and it turned out perfect. This is a story Rabbi Moshe was fond of telling himself. The soul and the evil urge. The rabbi of Kobrin taught, "The soul says to the evil urge what Abraham said to Lot, 'If thou wilt take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if thou take the right hand, then I will go to the left.' The soul says, 'When you try to lead me left, I will not heed you and go the right. But should you by any chance advise me to go right in your company, I'd prefer to go left.'" Bitter, not bad. The rabbi of Kobrin taught, when a man suffers, he ought not to say, "That's bad, that's bad." Nothing that God imposes on man is bad, but it is all right to say, "That's bitter." For among medicines, there are some that are made with bitter herbs. Not by bread only. In the course of the Sabbath meal, Rabbi Moshe once took a piece of bread in his hand and said to his Hasidim, "It is written, man doth not live by bread only, but by everything that proceedeth out of the mouth of the Lord doth man live. The life of man is not sustained by the stuff of bread, but by the sparks of divine life that are within it. He is here. All exists because of his life-giving life, and when he withdraws from anything, it crumbles away to nothing." By whose word? One of the rabbi of Kobrin's Hasidim was employed in public works. One morning while he was attending to his business, he was overcome by a worry. He did not know what to do. Finally, he let everything go, returned to town, and without stopping at his own house, went straight to the Zadok, who was just about to have breakfast. A dish of barley had been set before the Zadok, and he was saying the blessing over it, ending, "By whose word all things exist." The Zadok did not look at his Hasid, who had just crossed the threshold, and he did not offer to shake hands with him. So the man stood to one side and waited for an opportunity to present his problem. Finally, the rabbi said to him, "Zalman, I thought you were like your father, but now I see you are not like him. Your father once came to me with a whole load of troubles. As he entered, I was saying the blessing, ending, by whose word all things exist, just like today. When I had ended, I saw that your father was preparing to leave." "Abramele," I asked, "didn't you have something on your mind?" "No," said he, and took leave of me. Do you understand? When a Jew hears that everything exists because of the word of God, what is there left to ask? For this is the answer to all his questions and worries. And Rabbi Moshe gave the Hasid his hand in greeting. For a while, the Hasid was silent. Then he bade his master farewell and went back to his work comforted. Where is man? The time for the Sabbath meal had come, and many young men were standing around the table of the rabbi of Kobrin. He fixed his eyes on one of them, who had often been at his house, and asked the servant, "Who is that?" The servant was surprised, but gave the visitor's name. "I do not know him," said Rabbi Moshe. The servant gave the names of the young man's father and father-in-law, and when this too failed to jog the rabbi's memory, the servant told him when the young man had come to Kobrin and how he had heard the rabbi's teachings. At this the Zadok seemed to remember, and he addressed the subject of his inquiries, who was standing before him in great distress. Now I know why I did not recognize you. Where a man sends his thoughts, there he is himself. And since your thoughts were very far away, all I saw was a lump of flesh. 18. Do not crowd. Once on a Hanukkah evening, the people crowded around to see the rabbi of Kobrin light the candles. But he said, "It is written." The people saw. They tottered. They stood afar off. When you jostle and crowd, you are very far off. The flame goes out. A Hasid complained to the rabbi of Kobrin that every time he set out to see him, his heart was aflame with fervor, and he thought he would fly straight to heaven the moment he stood before his teacher. Yet every time he saw him face to face, the flame went out, and then his heart felt more shriveled and cold than at home. The rabbi said, "Remember what David says in the psalm, 'My soul thirsteth for God.' And further on, 'So have I looked for thee in the sanctuary.'" David implores God to let him feel the same fervor in the holy sanctuary that he felt when he was in a dry and weary land where no water was. For first, the all-merciful God wakens a man to holiness, but once he is kindled to act, the flame is taken from him, so that he may act for himself, and of himself attain to the state of perfect awakening. Satan's ruse. In olden times, so said the rabbi of Kobrin, when Satan wanted to prevent a Hasid from going to the Tzaddik, he assumed the shape of his father, or his mother, or his wife, and tried his utmost to persuade him to give up his plan. But when he saw that resistance only strengthened the Hasid in his faithfulness, he changed his tactics. He made his peace with the man he was dealing with, grew very friendly, and said, "All gentleness and docility, you have converted me. Just you go to your rabbi, but permit me to join you. Just you pray in your own way, and let me pray along with you. Just you learn whatever you can, and I shall help you learn." And so the time comes when Satan says, "Just you sit down in the Tzaddik seat, and I shall sit beside you. We two shall stay together." Accepting the world. One of Rabbi Moshe's Hasidim was very poor. He complained to the Tzaddik that his wretched circumstances were an obstacle to learning and praying. "In this day and age," said Rabbi Moshe, "the greatest devotion, greater than learning and praying, consists in accepting the world exactly as it happens to be." The original meaning. This is what Rabbi Moshe said to an author who put questions to him concerning the Kabbalah, the secret teachings, and the Kavanot, the mystical concentrations, which are directed towards superhuman effects. You must keep in mind that the word Kabbalah is derived from Kabul, to accept, and the word Kavanah from Kaven, to direct. For the ultimate significance of all the wisdom of the Kabbalah is to accept the yoke of the kingdom of God, and the ultimate significance of all the art of the Kavanot is to direct one's heart to God. When a man says, "The Lord is my God," meaning, "He is mine, and I am His," must not his soul go forth from his body? The moment the rabbi said this, he fell into a deep faint. A free gift. After Rabbi Yitzhak of Vorky's death, one of his Hasidim went to Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin. "What do you hope to get from me here in Lithuania?" asked the rabbi, "that you could not get just as much of, or even more, from any Tzaddik in Poland?" "My teacher," the man replied, "often said, that is, was a sacred duty to learn to know the rabbi of Kobrin, because he spoke the truth that is in his heart. And so I decided to go to you and hoped you might teach me how to attain to truth." "Truth," said the rabbi of Kobrin, "is not something that can be attained. God looks at a man who has devoted his entire life to attaining the truth, and suddenly he gives him a free gift of it. That is why it is written, 'You will give truth to Jacob.'" He took a pinch of snuff between two fingers and scattered it on the floor. "Look, even less than this." Again he took some snuff, only a few shreds of tobacco, and it can be even less, if only it is the truth. True fear of God. "Had I the true fear of God," said the rabbi of Kobrin, I should run through the streets and shout, 'You are sinning against the Torah in which is written, Ye shall be holy.'" The peg and the crown. The rabbi of Kobrin said, "He who is a leader in Israel must not think that the Lord of the world chose him because he is a great man. If the king chose to hang his crown on a wooden peg in the wall, would the peg boast that its beauty drew the king's gaze to it? For the sake of the others." On the eve of New Year's Day, before the afternoon prayer, the rabbi of Kobrin once laid his head on all the notes of request which were spread out before him, and said, "Lord of the world, thou knowest my folly, and my trespasses are not hid from thee. But what shall I do about all these people? They think I really am something, and so I beg of you, let not them that wait for thee be ashamed through me." Self-conquest. Once on the eve of the New Year, when Rabbi Moshe went up to the reader's desk to pray, he began to tremble in every limb. He clung to the pulpit, but the pulpit too swayed back and forth. The tzaddik could keep his balance only by bending way back. He looked as though he were driving his trembling inward. Only then did he stand firmly in his place and begin to pray. The reader. Before praying on New Year's Day, Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin said, "Once a king was angered at his rebellious people and sat in judgment upon them. No one dared come before him and plead for mercy. But among the throng was the man who had led the revolt. He knew that his head was forfeit and came forward and pleaded with the king. So, during the days of awe, the reader stands before the ark and prays for the congregation. He called to them. On New Year's Day, before the blowing of the ram's horn, the rabbi of Kobrin used to call out, "Little brothers, do not depend upon me. Every one had better take his own part." The offering. Once on a Sabbath, Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin was standing before the ark and praying the additional prayer, which is a substitute for the offerings of Sabbaths and feast days. When he said the words, "Lead us into our land, and there we shall prepare unto thee the offerings that are obligatory for us," he fell to the floor in a faint. They had great difficulty in reviving him, and he finished the prayer. That evening, Rabbi Moshe spoke again at his own table. "There in our land we shall bring the special offering for this Sabbath, for here we have no sanctuary and no service by sacrifices." And he kindled at the words and cried aloud, "Lord of the world, we ourselves shall bring ourselves to you in place of the offering." Then all understood why, in the house of prayer, he had fallen to the floor as if all life had left him. The fool. The rabbi of Kobrin was asked, "Why is it that a cantor is always called a fool?" "You know," he replied, "that the world of music verges on that of the turning to God. When the cantor sings, he is in the world of music and quite close to that other. How can he manage to keep from leaping over into it and giving himself up to the true turning? Is there any foolishness as foolish as that?" Exchange of strength. Rabbi Moshe taught, when a Jew is about to say, "Blessed art thou, O Lord our God, King of the world," and prepares to utter the first word, the word blessed, he shall do so with all his strength, so that he will have no strength left to say, "Art thou?" And this is the meaning of the verse in the scriptures. "But they that wait for the Lord shall exchange their strength." What we are really saying is, "Our Father in heaven, I am giving you all the strength that is within me in that very first word. Now will you, in exchange, give me an abundance of new strength so that I can go on with my prayer." Into the word. Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin said, "When you utter a word before God, then enter into that word with every one of your limbs." One of his listeners asked, "How can a big human being possibly enter into a little word?" "Anyone who thinks himself bigger than the word," said the tzaddik, "is not the kind of person we are talking about." The one who knows not how to ask. When the rabbi of Kobrin came to that part in the Passover Haggadah, which tells of the 4 sons whose father instructs them in the meaning of the Seder, and what is said about the youngest. And with the one who knows not how to ask, you must open. He always paused, sighed, and said to God, and the one, alas, who does not know how to pray, open his heart so that he may be able to pray. This proverance blands. One who knows one. This is what Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin said concerning the first question in the game of riddles, which is sung at the close of the Passover. Haggadah. 1. Who knows? 1. 1. I know. 1. 1. Who knows one? Who can know the one who is sheer oneness? For do not even the seraphim ask, where is the place of his glory? 1. And I know it in spite of everything. For, as the sage says, God, where can I find you? And where can I not find you? And the seraphim too reply, the whole earth is full of his glory. I know the one who is sheer oneness by his works within me. The ladder. Rabbi Moshe taught, it is written, and he dreamed, and behold a ladder set up on the earth, that he is every man. Every man must know, I am clay. I am one of countless shards of clay, but the top of it reached to heaven. My soul reaches to heaven. And behold the angels of God ascending and descending on it. Even the ascent and descent of the angels depend upon my deeds. Everywhere. The rabbi of Kobrin taught, God says to man, as he said to Moses, put off thy shoes from thy feet. Put off the habitual which encloses your foot, and you will know that the place on which you are now standing is holy ground. For there is no rung of human life on which we cannot find the holiness of God everywhere and at all times. He cometh. The rabbi of Kobrin taught, in the Midrash, we read that when Moses proclaimed to the people that God would deliver them from servitude, they said to him, how can we be delivered? For the whole land of Egypt is full of our idol worship. But he answered them, because God wants to deliver you, he does not heed your idol worship. As it is written, hark, my beloved, behold he cometh, leaping upon the mountains, skipping upon the hills. And that is the way it is now. When a man bethinks himself and yearns to be delivered from his evil ways, the evil urge whispers to him, how can you hope for deliverance? Have you not wasted all your days on trivial matters? But the Tzaddikim say, because God wants to deliver you, he will not heed what has been. He will leap across all and everything and deliver you. For the sake of God. The rabbi of Kobrin taught, it is written, and Moses reported the words of the people unto the Lord. In obedience to God's command, Moses had brought Israel the message that they were to be a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. And the people had replied, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. This means, it is not to attain a high rung that we desire to serve God, but only because he has spoken to us. Their answer pleased Moses, and he reported it to God in their name and his own. Not to fear death. When the Hasidim sat around the rabbi of Kobrin's table at the Feast of Weeks, he said to them, it is written that at Mount Sinai the people said to Moses, speak thou with us and we will hear. But let no God speak with us, lest we die. How is it possible that in their greatest hour, Israel refused to hear the voice of God for fear of death that is nothing but a wresting of the soul from its husk to cling to the light of life? Over and over again and more earnestly, the Tzaddik repeated his question. The third time he uttered it, he fainted away and lay motionless a while. It took them a long time to revive him. But then he straightened up in his chair and concluded his teaching, lest we die. For it was very hard for them to give up serving God on earth. The most humble. The rabbi of Kobrin was asked, how is it possible that Dathan and Abiram reproached Moses with wanting to make himself a prince over them? For does not the Torah testify that he was the most humble of all men? The rabbi expounded. When Moses sat in the Tzaddik's chair, he pronounced judgment with great force. That is why they thought he wanted to make himself a prince over them. But deep in his heart, he was the most humble of men. How different are the people who go their way, head bowed to the earth, and term themselves humble. That is a worthless sort of humility. True humility is hidden in the heart. Words not taken to heart. Once after the rabbi of Kobrin had said Torah at the Sabbath meal, he said to the Hasidim seated around his table, "I see that all the words I have spoken have not found a single man who took them into his heart. And if you ask me how I know this, since I am neither a prophet myself nor the son of a prophet, let me tell you, words that come from the heart go to the heart in all their truth. But if they find no heart that will receive them, then God shows mercy to the man who spoke them. He does not let them err about in space, but they all return to the heart from which they were spoken." That is what has happened to me. I felt something like a thrust, and they all thronged back into my heart. Sometime after Rabbi Moshe's death, a friend said, if there had been someone to whom he could have talked, he would still be alive. And it's sad. Rest. Once when he was old, he was seated at the Sabbath meal, and anyone could see that he was very weak. His trusted servant urged him to go and take a rest. "Fool," cried the rabbi, "the only rest I know is when I sit together with Israel. I have no other rest." If I knew, Rabbi Moshe once said, if I knew for sure that I had helped a single one of my Hasidim to serve God, I should have nothing to worry me. Another time he said, if I knew I had said amen just once in the way it ought to be said, I should have nothing to worry me. And on still another occasion he said, if I knew that after my death it would be said in heaven that a Jew was coming, I should have nothing to worry me at all. The end. On the great Sabbath, not many days before he died, Rabbi Moshe of Kobrin repeated the words of the psalm over and over again. "Praise the Lord, O my soul." Then he added softly, "Soul of mine, you will praise the Lord in every world, no matter in what world you are. But this is what I beg of God. I will praise the Lord while I live as long as I still live here. I want to be able to praise him." On the last day of Passover, he talked at table a long time before grace was said. Then he concluded, "Now I have nothing more to say. Let us say grace." On the following night, he lay down on his deathbed, and he died a week later. Most important. Soon after the death of Rabbi Moshe, Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk asked one of his disciples, "What was most important to your teacher?" The disciple thought and then replied, "Whatever he happened to be doing at the moment," which backed from the house of the Maggid of Koznitz. Moshe and Eliezer of Koznitz. For the light. Rabbi Moshe, the son of the Maggid of Koznitz, said, "It is written, pure olive oil, beaten for the light. We are to be beaten and bruised, but in order to glow with light." The window and the curtain. When young Rabbi Eliezer of Koznitz, Rabbi Moshe's son, was a guest in the house of Rabbi Naphtali of Ropchitz, he once cast a surprised glance at the window where the curtains had been drawn. When his host asked him the cause of his surprise, he said, "If you want people to look in, then why the curtains? And if you do not want them to, why the window?" "And what explanation have you found for this?" asked Rabbi Naphtali. "When you want someone you love to look in," said the young rabbi, "you draw aside the curtain." Hayim Meir, Yehiel of Mogielnica, and Yisachar of Woolbors. Justification. Rabbi Hayim Meir Yehiel told this story. "My mother, peace be with her, lost one child after another in early infancy. Finally, she gave birth to a child they named Moshe, and he looked as though he might survive. The first time he sat at the table of his grandfather, the Holy Maggid, for the third Sabbath meal, was when he was 7 years old. On that day, the passage in the scriptures had been read, which deals with how God commanded Moses to speak to the rock that it give forth its water. And Moses smote the rock, and water came forth abundantly. While they were at the Moses meal, the boy Moshe suddenly leaped on the table and cried, "The Torah speaks of the sin of Moses, but was it sin for him to smite the rock? Did not God himself say to him, 'Take the rod'?" And he spoke on and gave a logical justification for Moses, our teacher. Then he got down from the table and said to his mother, "Mother, my head aches." He went to his room, lay down on his bed, and died. Later, the Tzaddikim of that generation said that the soul of our teacher Moses had been in the boy, and that he had been born only to justify Moses, our teacher. When he died, my mother implored her father, the holy Maggid, to help her, so that she might rear a son to manhood. He answered her, "My daughter, when you lie with your husband, your soul soars high in ecstasy, and that is why the children you conceive do not get enough of the stuff of earth. You must bring your soul down to earth, and then you will conceive a son who will live." My mother absorbed this counsel with all her heart, and soon afterward, she conceived me. The night before I was born, she dreamed that she was led into a great hall, where old men wearing crowns and white robes were seated at a long table listening to a boy, to her son Moshe, who sat at the head of the board. She wanted to run up to him and embrace him, but he called to her, "Do not touch me." Then he blessed her for the hour of birth. Not without the garment of flesh. Rabbi Chaim Meir Yehiel told this story. When I was 5 years old, I said to my grandfather, the holy Maggid, "Grandfather, you go to a rabbi, and my father goes to a rabbi. I am the only one who doesn't go to a rabbi. I want to go to a rabbi too." I began to cry. Said my grandfather to me, "But I too am a rabbi," said I to him. "Then why do you go to a rabbi?" said he. "What makes you think I go to a rabbi?" said I. "Because at night I see an old man with you, and you are seated before him as a servant before his master. So he must be your rabbi. He can find a mark." "My child," said he, "that is the Baal Shem Tov. May his merits shield us. When you are older, you will also be able to study with him." Said I, "No, I don't want a dead rabbi." And I think the same to this very day, for I do not want the rungs of the spirit without the garment of the flesh. When learning from a rabbi, the disciple must resemble his teacher, at least in one thing, in having a garment of flesh. That is the mystery of the divine presence in exile. Only on my own. Rabbi Chaim Meir Yehiel, the grandson of the Maggid of Koznitz, told this incident. When I was a boy of 11, my grandfather summoned me and said, "Come to me at dawn, and I shall teach you the Kabbalah." I did not do as he said, but from that time on, I studied alone at dawn and did my service, for I did not want anything I could not get on my own. After a time, my grandfather again summoned me and said, "First I thought you did not like getting up early, but now I have found out that you are up early, and nevertheless you do not come to me." But he had grasped the fact that I wanted to study on my own, for he went on to say, "Well, just make a point of being there every morning when I pray, and I shall see to it that you receive holy insight." But I did not even want to get this without working for it myself, and so I was present only at the beginning and end of the prayer. Time passed, and then one night I had a vision. My teacher, the rabbi of Apt, blessed be his memory, appeared to me and brought me phylacteries from paradise. When I had bound one of the phylacteries to my forehead, I sensed a holy insight. End quote. The choice of a soul. Rabbi Chaim Meir Yehiel once said to his Hasidim, "I know a man who, as a boy, was removed to the upper worlds on the night he became bar mitzvah, and there they allowed him to choose a soul to his own liking. And so he selected a great soul. But it did not reach any high rung after all, and he remained a little man." The Hasidim realized that he had been speaking of himself. The secret of the counting. The rabbi of Mogielnica once said to his Hasidim, "I shall explain to you the secret of the counting of the 50 days, between Passover and the Feast of Weeks. First it is dark, then it grows very light. But after that, it grows dark again, and then, from day to day, from step to step, more and more light appears, until it is all light again, and the receiving of the Torah, for which we have prepared ourselves, comes to pass. Against pious thoughts. On a certain Purim, when the rabbi of Mogielnica was reading the scroll of Esther, a young man stood nearby and said to him, when the reading was over, "I fear I did not listen closely enough, and perhaps skipped over one word or another while I was silently reciting the scroll with you." Later, the rabbi said to his friends, "There's your super pious man. All he cares about is doing exactly what is prescribed. But he whose soul is directed toward doing the will of God within the commandment and clings wholly to God's will may very possibly fail to do something of what is prescribed, but it does not trouble him. For it is written, 'In thy love for her wilt thou err constantly with anyone.'" No contradictions. The rabbi of Mogielnica said, "It is well known that the sayings of our sages, which seem to contradict one another, are all words of the living God. Each of them decided according to the depth of his root in heaven. And up there all their words are truth, for in the upper worlds there are no contradictions. They're all opposites, such as prohibition and permission, guilt and guiltlessness, are one unified whole. The distinction between prohibition and permission appears only in their actions on earth. There is a difference. Rabbi Chaim of Mogielnica was about to go on a journey, but because he was so old and weak, he could not manage to get into the carriage. Some of the Hasidim who were present went in search of a stool. But when Rabbi Yisachar saw his teacher standing and waiting, he lay down on the ground. The Tzaddik set foot on his back and got into the carriage. Later, the disciples discussed the incident. One of them said, "What is there so remarkable about it? I am ready to lie under the rabbi's feet for 2 hours." On Friday evening, before the Tzaddik came to the meal, the youth lay down under the table. His master noticed it at once. Now, he said, "come out from under that table." Marriage. Rabbi Yisachar of Woolbors recounted, "After my wedding, a friend and I were studying the marital laws in the house of study, when our teacher, Rabbi Chaim of Mogielnica, came in and gave us a document, which he said would explain itself. He left immediately. The document was a marriage contract, in which we did not notice anything that required explanation. We asked the rabbi's son about it. "Don't you see," said he, "that there is a drawing of 2 clasping hands on the sheet?" That's what he was referring to. Later, his father confirmed him and interpreted the symbol. "You can see by the sleeves," he explained, "that the hands are those of the groom and the bride. The groom gives his hand to the bride and says, 'I betroth thee unto me forever. One hand shall never more be withdrawn from the other, in righteousness and in justice. Now a pat, and now a slap. In loving kindness and in compassion. Now a tidbit, and now a good drink. But we shall remain together forever. We dare not lose our tempers. That is how a Jew should be with the Lord of the world. He mustn't lose his temper." In the world of confusion. They tell this story. To Rabbi Yisachar of Woolbors there came a dead man, whom he had once known when he was alive and prominent in his community, and begged the rabbi's help, saying that his wife had died some time ago and now he needed money to arrange for his marriage with another. "Don't you know," the Tzaddik asked him, "that you are no longer among the living? That you are in the world of confusion?" When the man refused to believe him, he lifted the tails of the dead man's coat and showed him that he was dressed in his shroud. Later, Rabbi Yisachar's son asked, "Well, if that is so, perhaps I too am in the world of confusion?" "Once you know that there is such a thing as that world," answered his father, "you are not in it." From the school of the Rabbi of Lublin. David of Lilov. The new suit. Little David's father was a poor man. During the first months of an exceptionally severe winter, he could not buy his son a warm suit of clothes. At long last, he managed to scrape together the money. When David arrived at the school in his new suit, he saw a younger boy shivering in rags, and immediately changed clothes with him. As soon as David reached home, he went to his mother and told her what had happened. "Put on your old suit," she said, "and go back to school. If your father comes home and finds out what you have done, he will be angry and beat you." "But mother," answered the boy, "it is better for him to beat me and work off his anger." The name of God. Rabbi David of Lelov once heard a simple man who was praying say the name of God after every verse. The reason he did this was that there are 2 dots, one above the other at the close of each verse. The man took each to be the tiny letter Yud or Yud, and since the name of God is sometimes abbreviated in the form of 2 Yuds, he thought that what he saw at the end of every verse was the name of God. The Hasidic instructed him, "Wherever you find 2 Jews, Yuds side by side and on a par, there is the name of God. But whenever it looks to you as if one Jew Yud were standing above the other, then they are not Jews Yuds, and it is not the name of God." Concerning those who ply a trade. Rabbi Yitzhak of Vorki told this story. Once when I was traveling with Rabbi David Lelov, of blessed memory, we arrived in the little town of Elkish, about an hour past midnight. Rabbi David did not want to wake anyone, so we went to Rabbi Barish, the baker. He was standing at his oven and doing his work. When we entered, I saw his face cloud over because we had found him working. "Oh," said Rabbi David, "if only God let me earn my bread by the work of my hands." The truth of the matter is that everyone in Israel has an inner urge he himself does not know of. What he wants is to work for his fellow men. Everyone who plies a trade, the cobbler, the tailor, or the baker, takes money in return for his work, only that he may live and continue to work for his fellow men. While Rabbi David was speaking, I saw the baker's face clear and grow brighter and brighter. The mistake. Rabbi Yitzhak of Vorki told this story. Once when I was on the road with my holy teacher, Rabbi David of Lelov, and we stopped over in a town far from our home, a woman suddenly fell upon him in the street and began to beat him. She thought he was her husband who had abandoned her many years ago. After a few moments, she saw her error and burst into a flood of tears. "Stop crying," Rabbi David said to her. "You were not striking me, but your husband." And he added in a low tone, "How often we strike someone because we take him for another." Peacemaking. Rabbi David and his disciple Yitzhak, later the rabbi of Vorki, were once on their way to a place Rabbi David had been asked to come to in order to make peace between 2 men who had a long-standing quarrel. On the Sabbath, he acted as the reader of the prayers. The 2 adversaries were present. After the close of the Sabbath, he ordered the horses harnessed for the journey home. "But the rabbi has not carried out what he came for," said his disciple. "You are mistaken," said Rabbi David. "When in the course of my prayer I said, 'He who maketh peace in his high places, may he make peace for us,' the peace was made, and it was really so." With the children. Whenever Rabbi David of Lelov came to a Jewish town, he gathered all the children around him and gave each a little whistle. Then he packed them into the big wagon he used for traveling and drove them all over town. The children whistled with might and main the entire time, and the entire time Rabbi David's face was wreathed in smiles. With animals. Once Rabbi David went to Lublin with his disciple Rabbi Yitzhak in order to spend the new year with his teacher, the seer, as he did year after year. On New Year's Day, before the blowing of the ram's horn, the seer looked around and noticed that Rabbi David was not there. Yitzhak immediately ran to the inn to look for him. He found Rabbi David standing in front of the gate to the house, holding out his cap full of barley to the horses, which their driver, in his hurry to get to the house of prayer, had left behind unfed. When Rabbi David, having finished feeding the horses, came to the house of prayer, the seer said, "That was fine blowing of the ram's horn Rabbi David treated us to." One Friday afternoon, Rabbi David was on a journey, when suddenly the horse stopped and refused to go on. The driver beat the horse, but the Tzaddik objected. "Rabbi," cried the driver, The sun will soon be setting, and the Sabbath is almost here." "You are quite right," answered Rabbi David. "But what you have to do is to make the animal understand you. Otherwise, it will someday summon you to court in heaven, and that will not be to your honor." Concerning Joseph's brothers, the rabbi of Breslov said to his Hasidim, "A man cannot be redeemed until he recognizes the flaws in his soul and tries to mend them. A nation cannot be redeemed until it recognizes the flaws in its soul and tries to mend them. Whoever permits no recognition of his flaws, be it man or nation, permits no redemption. We can be redeemed to the extent to which we recognize ourselves." When Jacob's sons said to Joseph, "We are upright men," he answered, "That is it that I spoke unto you, saying, Ye are spies." But later, when they confessed the truth with their lips and with their hearts, and said to one another, "We are verily guilty concerning our brother," the first gleam of their redemption dawned. Overcome with compassion, Joseph turned aside and wept. Moshe Teitelbaum. The enemy. In his youth, Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum had been an enemy of the Hasidic teachings, for he regarded them as rank heresy. Once he was staying with his friend, Rabbi Joseph Asher, who was also opposed to these innovators. At just about this time, the prayer book of the holy Rabbi Isaac Luria had appeared in print. When the volume was brought to the two friends, Rabbi Moshe snatched the heavy tome from the messenger and threw it on the floor. But Rabbi Joseph Asher picked it up and said, "After all, it is a prayer book, and we must not treat it disrespectfully." When the rabbi of Lublin was told of the incident, he said, "Rabbi Moshe will become a Hasid. Rabbi Joseph Asher will remain an opponent of the Hasidic way. For he who can burn with enmity can also burn with love for God. But he who is coldly hostile will always find the way closed." And so it was. Fear. In the notes Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum made on the dreams he had in his youth, we find the following. "I was looking out of the window on the eve of the new year, and there were the people running to the house of prayer. And I saw that they were driven by the fear of the day of judgment. And I said to myself, God be thanked. I have been doing the right thing all through the year. I have studied right and prayed right, so I do not have to be afraid. And then my dreams showed me all my good works. I looked and looked. They were torn, ragged, ruined. And at that instant I woke up. Overcome with fear, I ran to the house of prayer along with the rest." Paradise. In Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum's notes on his dreams, there is an entry which reads, "I have been in the paradise of the Tanaim." He had also kept a sheet with the words, "The angels will immerse you, and you shall suffer no harm." In his dream, he stood near a mountain and wanted to get into the paradise of the Tanaim. But he was told that first he had to immerse himself in Miriam's well. And at that very instant he looked into the deep water and shuddered. But angels laid hold of him and immersed him and carried him up from the depths. Then he entered the paradise of the Tanaim. There he saw one of the masters sitting with a fur cap on his head and studying the tractate called The First Gate. There the path stopped. Rabbi Moshe was surprised. "That can't be paradise," he cried. "Listen, child," said the angels. "You seem to think that the Tanaim are in paradise, but that's not so. Paradise is in the Tanaim." Mourning and joy. When Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum became a disciple of the seer of Lublin, he studied the Hasidic way of life for a time and liked it well. But once a question rose in his heart. He noticed that they were always joyful, that they performed every labor with joy, walked and rested with joy, and prayed with sublime joy. Then he remembered the words in the Path of Life. Every God-fearing man must mourn and lament the destruction of the temple. The next time he was on the way to the rabbi of Lublin, he was filled with doubts. But he curbed them and said to God, "Lord, you know all my thoughts, and know that it is my purpose not to permit my eyes to regard the ways of good men as wrong. So be with me, and help me when I come to my master, to propound my question. For our sages say, if a man comes to be cleansed, they will assist him. The word they is used, not he, for the they refers to human beings. In this way, he prayed and communed with God all the way to Lublin. The moment he crossed the seer's threshold, the master said to him, "Why is your face clouded today?" It does, indeed, say in the path of life that every God-fearing man should mourn and lament the destruction of the temple. But believe me, we too break into lamentation for Jerusalem at midnight, and we moan and weep. And yet it is all done in a spirit of joy. Do you know the story of the king who was sent into exile? He wandered about for a long time until he found refuge with a friend. This faithful friend shed tears whenever he remembered that the king had been driven out of his realm. But at the same time, he rejoiced that the king was lodging in his house. Now, you see, dear friend, that the exiled divine presence is lodging with us. I really should not reveal this thing, for we are bidden to keep silence on matters concerning God. But our sages have said, if a man comes to be cleansed, they will assist him. The word they is used, not he, for the they refers to human beings. Waiting. Rabbi Moshe Teitelbaum was always waiting for the coming of the Messiah. Whenever he heard a noise in the street, he asked in trembling tones, "Has the messenger come?" Before going to sleep, he would lay out his Sabbath clothes near the bed and lean his pilgrim's staff against them. A watchman had orders to wake the rabbi at the very first sign he saw. Once someone wanted to sell Rabbi Moshe a fine house right next to the house of prayer. "What would I do with it?" he cried. "Soon the Messiah will come, and I shall go to Jerusalem." The great Tzaddikim of his era said that a spark from the soul of Jeremiah had been reborn in him. When anyone wondered at the greatness of his sorrow on the day commemorating the destruction of the temple, he said, "Why should you be astonished? I am the man that hath seen affliction, but God will let me see the restoration as well." Even when he was very old, it never occurred to him that he could possibly die before the coming of the Messiah. Once, while he was walking in the procession around the pulpit on the 7th day of the Feast of Booths, the day of the great prayer for salvation, he prayed, "Lord of the world, grant us the coming of the end. And do not think that I am concerned about my own welfare. I agree that I shall not be liberated and redeemed. I am ready to be as the stone hurled from the sling and to suffer every anguish for the one and only purpose that your divine presence may suffer no more." When he was 82, he prayed on the eve of the Day of Atonement, before all vows, "Lord of the world, you know that I am a wicked sinner, but you also know that I intend to speak the truth. I do not lie, and so I shall say only what is so. Had I, Moshe, the son of Hannah, known that my hair would turn gray before the Messiah came, I would very probably not have stood it. But you, Lord of the world, have made a fool of me day after day until I turned gray. By my life, it is indeed a great trick for the Almighty to make a fool of an old fool. I implore you, Lord of the world, let it come now, not for our sake, but for your own, that your name may be sanctified amongst the many." Before his death he said, "I am thinking about my holy teachers, whose soul is in the uppermost paradise. Why do they keep silence? Why do they not shake all the worlds to bring the Messiah down to earth?" And after a little he continued, "In the realm of delight, they have most likely been so deluged with joy that they have forgotten the earth, and to them it seems as if the Messiah had already come." And presently he added, "Even if they try to do the same to me, I shall not abandon my people." Naphtali of Ropchitz. The watchman. In Ropchitz, the town where Rabbi Naphtali lived, it was the custom for the rich people whose houses stood isolated or at the far end of the town to hire men to watch over their property by night. Late one evening, when Rabbi Naphtali was skirting the woods which circled the city, he met such a watchman walking up and down. "For whom are you working?" he asked. The man told him and then inquired in his turn, "And whom are you working for, Rabbi?" The words struck the Tzaddik like a shaft. "I am not working for anybody just yet," he barely managed to say. Then he walked up and down beside the man for a long time. "Will you be my servant?" he finally asked. "I should like to," the man replied. "But what would be my duties?" "To remind me," said Rabbi Naphtali. The morning prayer. "There are tzaddikim," said Rabbi Naphtali, "who pray that those in need of help may come to them and find help through their prayers. But the rabbi of Ropchitz gets up early in the morning and prays that all those in need of help may find it in their own homes, not have to go to Ropchitz, and not be deluded into thinking that the rabbi has helped them." A wish. Once after the additional prayer on the Day of Atonement, the rabbi of Ropchitz said, "I wish that I could be reborn as a cow, that a Jew might come to me in the morning to take some of my milk to refresh himself before beginning the service of God." Leader and generation. Rabbi Naphtali was once talking about the story of the Midrash, which tells that God showed Moses all the generations to come, generation after generation with its preachers, generation after generation with its judges. "Why?" asked one of his disciples. "Is the generation mentioned first and the leader afterward? Should he not take precedence?" "You know," said the rabbi, "that the radiance of Moses' face was like that of the sun, of Joshua's like that of the moon, and so the faces of the successive leaders grew paler and paler. If God had inadvertently shown to Moses Naphtali, the school assistant, for so he liked to call himself, as a rabbi, Moses would have cried out, 'Is that supposed to be a rabbi?' and fainted with the shock. That is why God first showed him the generation and then the leader befitting it." The foolish request. The rabbi of Ropchitz told the following incident. During the siege of Sebastopol, Tsar Nicholas was once riding along one of the walls when an enemy archer took aim at him. A Russian soldier who observed this from afar screamed and startled the emperor's horse so that it swerved to the side and the arrow missed its target. The Tsar told the man to ask any favor he pleased. "Our sergeant is so brutal," the soldier faltered. "He is always beating me. If only I could serve under another sergeant." "Fool," cried Nicholas, "be a sergeant yourself." We are like that. We pray for the petty needs of the hour and do not know how to pray for our redemption. The twin loaves. Two youths who were deeply devoted to each other used to go to Rabbi Naphtali together to sit at his table. When he distributed the bread, for such was his custom, he always gave the two friends twin loaves, clinging each to each. Once they were vexed with each other. They did not know how this feeling had entered their hearts and could not overcome it. Soon after, when they again went to Ropchitz and were seated at the rabbi's table on the eve of the Sabbath, he took the twin loaves, cut them apart, and gave one to each of the youths. On their way home from the meal, they were overcome with emotion, and both cried out in the same breath, "We are at fault! We are at fault!" They went to an inn, ordered schnapps, and drank a toast to each other. The next day, at the midday meal of the Sabbath, Rabbi Naphtali again put twin loaves into the hands of the friends. Conflagration. Young Rabbi Favish, a disciple of the rabbi of Ropchitz, recited the Lamentations every midnight as if Jerusalem, the city of God, had been destroyed that very day. Time after time he was overwhelmed with an infinite sorrow. Late one evening, the rabbi of Ropchitz asked the Hasidim who were with him to follow him into the house of study. "I shall show you," he said, "the meaning of the prophet's words. Arise, cry out in the night." In the semi-darkness of the house of study, they found young Favish lying on a bench in a deep sleep. For a while they stood in front of him and wondered why the tzaddik had taken them here. Suddenly the youth slipped to the floor, tore open his shirt collar, and cried, "Mother, I am burning up!" Just then the clock struck 12. Later on, Favish left the rabbi of Ropchitz and became the disciple of the rabbi of Apartment. His first teacher was much grieved about this. "With all my strength," he said, "I tried to keep down the fire." With the rabbi of Apt, he will be a burnt offering in the conflagration of his heart. Soon after this, Rabbi Favish died in the house of prayer during the saying of the prayer. The breath of all that lives shall bless your name. The teacher. Rabbi Naphtali of Ropchitz received a man who came with a long list of sins in his hand. He said that he had already been to another tzaddik, but that he had imposed so heavy a penance upon him that he was physically unable to endure it. The rabbi cut him short. "And what wrong did our father do to you?" he cried in a terrible voice. "That you have betrayed him." These words struck the man down. He lost consciousness and fell. Several Hasidim from Hungary who were standing by began to laugh. Rabbi Naphtali turned on them angrily. "I have all but slain a human soul," he cried. "And you laugh. Forgive us," they said. When our teacher, Rabbi Isaac of Kalev, lay on his deathbed, he gave us a sign. "If you find a man who can take the insides out of a sinner, cleanse them, and put them back again, that he may live, that is the man you shall take for your rabbi." That was why we laughed. "We have found a new master, and we shall keep him until the coming of the Messiah. Then we shall return to our old teacher." Then the tzaddik laughed with them. He raised the penitent sinner from the floor. "Thine iniquity is taken away, and thy sin expiated," he said. "Go in peace, keep to the way of God, and he will help you." The penitent who felt ashamed. A sinner who wanted to atone came to the rabbi of Ropchitz to learn what penance he should do. He was ashamed to confess all his sins to the tzaddik, and yet he had to disclose each and every one, for otherwise the rabbi could not have told him the proper form of atonement. So he said that one of his friends had done such and such a thing, but had been too ashamed to come in person, and had commissioned him to go in his stead and find out for him the purification for every one of his sins. Rabbi Naphtali looked smilingly into the man's sly and tense face. "Your friend," said he, "is a fool. He could easily have come to me himself and pretended to represent someone who was ashamed to come in his own person." The arrogant ascetic. When Rabbi Naphtali was young, there was a man in his native city who fasted and kept vigils until he considered himself quite close to perfection, and his heart swelled. Rabbi Naphtali, who knew very well what was going on within that man, once happened to be in the house of study when a boy grazed the man with his elbow while he was sunk in meditation. The rabbi rebuked the boy. "How dare you disturb this man? Don't you know that he has been fasting for 24 hours? Rather say from one Sabbath to the next." The ascetic corrected his statement, and with that, what was hidden became manifest. The other half. Once on the great Sabbath, the rabbi of Ropchitz came home from the house of prayer with weary steps. "What made you so tired?" asked his wife. "It was the sermon," he replied. "I had to speak of the poor and their many needs for the coming Passover, for unleavened bread and wine and everything else is terribly high this year." "And what did you accomplish with your sermon?" his wife went on to ask. "Half of what is necessary," he answered. "You see, the poor are now ready to take. As for the other half, whether the rich are ready to give, I don't know about that yet." Do not stop. On the day of rejoicing in the law, the rabbi of Ulanov, who was a dear friend of the rabbi of Ropchitz, lay dying. In Ropchitz, the Hasidim had just begun the great round dance in the court of the Tzaddik's house. He was standing at the window and looking down at them with a smile, when suddenly he raised his hand. Instantly they stopped and gazed up at him with faltering breath. For a while he kept silent and seemed as someone who has been overcome by bad news. Then he signed to the Hasidim with his hand and cried, "When one of the generals falls in battle, do the companies scatter and take to flight? The fight goes on. Rejoice and dance." Later it became known that the rabbi of Ulanov had died that very hour. Shlomo Leib of Lenchno. Refractory eyes. "When I was a boy," said Rabbi Shlomo Leib of Lenchno, "I adjured all the parts of my body to do nothing, save what was the will of God, and they all consented, all except my eyes. So I said I would not open my eyes, and kept lying down. When my mother asked me why I did not get up, I refused to tell, so she beat me with a stick. Then I asked my eyes whether they were now ready to take the oath, but they still held out. Finally, my mother beat me so hard that they took pity on me and said yes, so then I could get up. Fearless. Rabbi Zevi Elimelech of Dinov was asked how it was that he had always remained true to his friend Rabbi Shemolo Leib of Lenchno, even though he belonged to another school. He answered, "How could I be against him?" When the two of us were studying with Rabbi Mendel in Raimanov, everyone there was so overcome with fear that not even the greatest dared raise his eyebrows. But he, Shlomo Leib, took off his shoes and danced on the table in his stocking feet, right in front of the rabbi, who sat there and watched and never uttered a word. End quote. In the image of God. The Yehudi once told his friend Rabbi Kalman of Krakow that among his disciples there was one in whose face one could still see the full image of God. Kalman took a candle and went to the house of study where the disciples slept. He studied every face intently, but did not find what he was seeking. "I guess you didn't look behind the stove," said the Yehudi when his friend told him of his vain search, and he accompanied him back. Behind the stove, they found young Shlomo Leib. Rabbi Kalman looked at him for a very long time by the light of his candle. "It is true," he said then. "It is true." A wanderer and fugitive. After studying in Lublin and Raimanov for a time, Rabbi Shlomo Leib attached himself to the Yehudi, who said to him, "The most effective penance is to become a wanderer and fugitive." So Rabbi Shlomo decided in his soul to become a fugitive and wanderer. Many years later, a Hasid who lived in Lenchno visited Rabbi Mendel of Kotsk. The rabbi asked him, "Did you see the rabbi of Lenchno?" "I took leave of him before coming here," answered the Hasid. "And was he cheerful?" asked the rabbi of Kotsk. "Yes," replied the Hasid. "That's the way it is," the rabbi of Kotsk said sorrowfully. He who is first a wanderer and fugitive becomes cheerful afterward. The 400. Rabbi Yitzhak of Vorki once asked Rabbi Shlomo Leib of Lenchno, "Why do your Hasidim look so broken in spirit and depressed?" He replied, "Don't you know that my men are part of the 400 who went into exile with David, and of whom it is written, and everyone that was in distress, and everyone that was in debt, and everyone that was discontented." And where? The perfect swimmer. When the rabbi of Lenchno's son was a boy, he once saw Rabbi Yitzchak of Vorki praying. Full of amazement, he came running to his father and asked how it was possible for such a tzaddik to pray quietly and simply, without giving any sign of ecstasy. "A poor swimmer," answered his father, "has to thrash around in order to stay up in the water. The perfect swimmer rests on the tide, and it carries him." Yisachar Ber of Radoshitz. 2 ways. A grandson of the rabbi of Radoshitz told this. In his youth, Rabbi Yisachar Ber had been a disciple of Rabbi Moshe Leib of Sasov. The rabbi of Sasov used to take him along on his trips to ransom prisoners. Once they were on the Vistula, when a storm broke out and almost capsized the boat, the rabbi of Sasov rose and cried, "We are going to our father!" and clamped his hands, as wedding guests do during the bridal dance. They were saved. Some time after this, they went to Warsaw to see the governor. When they arrived at his palace, they saw that it was surrounded by armed guards who refused to admit anyone without a written permit. Rabbi Moshe Leib asked my grandfather, "What shall I tell them?" He replied, "Say to them in their own language, Puzdaj. That means let pass and also let go." Rabbi Moshe Leib, who was almost a giant in stature, went up to one of the guards and roared the word Puzdaj at him. The man retreated in alarm and let the two proceed. We do not know just what happened after that, but the rabbi of Sasov must have roared Puzdaj to the governor as well, because all the prisoners on whose behalf they had come were released. Skip. In the bowl. Rabbi Yisachar Ber was very poor in his youth. One year he had to fast after as well as before the Day of Atonement, and when the Feast of Booths drew near, he did not have the wherewithal to celebrate it. So he stayed in the house of study after prayer, for he knew that there was no food in his house. But his wife had sold a piece of jewelry she still had, without telling him about it, and had bought holiday loaves and potatoes and candles for the sum she received. Toward evening, when the rabbi came home and entered the booth, he found a festive table awaiting him, and was filled with joy. He washed his hands, seated himself, and began to eat the potatoes with great gusto, for he had gone hungry for days. But when Rabbi Yisachar Ber grew aware of how preoccupied he was with eating, he stopped. "Berel," he said to himself, "you are not sitting in the festive booth. Why, you are sitting right in the bowl." And he did not take another bite. The terror of the ritual bath. This story is told. Once, young Yishakar was so very poor that he had eaten nothing for a number of days, for it went against his grain to confide his trouble to others. So one evening, when he felt that he could not keep alive much longer, he said to himself that he had better take one more ritual bath before he grew too weak. In those days, the bath in Radoshitz lay 60 or 70 steps below the level of the ground. He undressed down to his shirt and started on his way. As he descended the stairs, he heard a noise, as though someone were striking his hand on water. But he went on. The noise grew louder and louder, and it was clear that there were many hands beating on water. Yishakar Ber paused a moment and then resumed his way. A gust of wind extinguished his lantern. In the darkness, he heard a hideous clamor down below. He noticed creatures rising out of the depths to block his path. Quickly, he threw off his shirt and jumped into the water. It grew very quiet. All he heard was one more sound, as though someone were saying, "Lost," and snapping his fingers. Yisachar Ber immersed himself again and again. Then he climbed up the stairs, dressed, and went home. In front of his house stood a wagon loaded with sacks of flour and other food. "Are you Rabbi Yisachar Ber?" asked the driver. "I was told to deliver these goods to you." Now, a few hours earlier, on that very day, a farm wagon had driven up to the house of a liquor merchant, a Hasid who lived near the town. In the wagon was a tall, very old man. As the merchant came to the door to greet him, he looked at him piercingly with his rather nearsighted eyes and asked, "Where is the rabbi of this place?" "We have no rabbi here," answered the distiller. "Don't you know any extraordinary man in the town of Radoshitz?" the old man went on to ask. "Any fine Jew?" "There is no fine man here," the Hasid assured him. "We have nothing extraordinary of any description unless you would consider the man who teaches our children something extraordinary. He certainly is a singular fellow, what you might call a pious man. What we call him is just Berel, the idler." At that, the old man straightened up in the wagon so that he looked even taller than he was, and fairly snorted. "What's that? You call him an idler? He's no idler, he's a great man. He shakes the world the way an ordinary person might shake a tree in the woods." Then he called to his driver, "Back to Lublin!" And on the instant, the wagon with the two men vanished. Suddenly, the Hasid realized that the tall man he had seen was the rabbi of Lublin, for someone had once given him a description of the seer of Lublin. But the next moment he thought, "Why, the rabbi of Lublin died 2 years ago." Then he loaded a wagon with sacks of flour and other food and sent it to Radoshitz. His first healing. Once, when young Yisachar Ber was on his way to Pizhisha to see his teacher the Yehudi, and was about to cross a hill which lies before the town, he heard screams and sobs from the valley below. There could be no doubt that the sounds came from his master's house. He ran down in great bewilderment. The moment the Yehudi caught sight of Yisachar Ber, he told him with tears streaming down his cheeks that his son was ill and on the verge of death. "We don't know what to do next," he said. "But here you are, just in the nick of time. Take the child, and I know you will make him well." Yisachar Ber listened in great dismay. He had never had anything to do with such matters, nor ever felt any extraordinary powers within himself. But he took up the child, put him down in his cradle again, and rocked him. And rocking, he poured his pleading soul out before God. In an hour, the boy was out of danger. Peasant wisdom. Rabbi Yisachar Ber once met an old peasant from the village of Oleshnie, who had known him when he was young, but was not aware of his rise in the world. "Berel," the peasant called to him, "what's new with you?" "And what's new with you?" asked the rabbi. "Well, Berel, what shall I tell you?" answered the other. "What you don't get by your own work you don't have." From that time on, whenever Rabbi Ber spoke of the proper way to conduct one's life, he added, "And the old man of Oleshnie said, 'What you don't get by your own work you don't have.'" The Confession. Once when Rabbi Yisachar Ber was very ill, he said to himself, "It is usual for a sick man to confess his sins. Now what shall I confess? Shall I say, 'I have sinned'? But a man in the condition I am in now cannot lie, and I have not sinned. Or shall I say, 'I have done too little in the service of God, but I did whatever I possibly could'? There is one thing, though, that I can confess. My feeling toward God was not clear and not pure enough, not wholly turned to Him and Him alone. I can take on myself the task of making it clearer and purer. For in this there are no bounds to improvement, since our feeling is based on our grasp of the magnitude of God, of boundless God. And so that is the task I shall take on myself. If God helps me recover, I shall try to make my feeling for Him clearer, purer, and more wholly turned to Him." He recovered and lived for another 20 years. The Imitator. The rabbi of Radoshitz had a disciple who could imitate his teacher's way of pronouncing the Sabbath Eve benediction of sanctification so perfectly that whoever heard him from a distance thought it was the rabbi himself. Once, when he happened to be in Radoshitz, the Tzaddik summoned him. "I am told," said he, "that you can utter the benediction of sanctification in exact imitation of my voice and gestures. Do it for me." "If the rabbi will promise not to be annoyed," said his disciple, "I shall be glad to do it." "You need have no fears," said the Tzaddik. The disciple pronounced the blessing over the wine, just like the rabbi, and made exactly the same gestures. But when he came to a certain passage, he paused, grew motionless, and then finished the benediction as best he could. When his disciple had ended, the Tzaddik asked him, "Why didn't you go on?" "Rabbi," answered his disciple, "when you come to that passage, you offer yourself up, and I am under no obligation to do that." Strange assistance. Rabbi Moshe of Leilov's daughter, a granddaughter of Rabbi David of Leilov, who had been the Yehudi's friend and protector, was childless. Time after time she beset her father with requests to pray for her. Finally, he told her that only the rabbi of Radoshitz could assist her in this matter. She immediately made preparation for the journey and traveled to Radoshitz in the company of her mother-in-law, who was also the daughter of a distinguished Tzaddik. When she had told Rabbi Yisachar Ber her trouble, he turned on her and berated her as one scolds a spoiled child. "What's all this about wanting children, you impudent baggage? Out with you!" The young woman, who had been delicately reared and never heard a rough word, fled, dissolved in tears. "Now I shall cry and cry till I die," she said to herself. But her mother-in-law went to the rabbi and asked him why he had shamed the poor woman as he did, whether she had by any chance committed some sin. "Wish her good luck," answered the rabbi. "Everything is right with her now." There was no other way than to stir her to the very depths. The woman returned to him and he gave her his blessing. Soon after she came home, she conceived a son. I and you. The rabbi of Radoshitz was asked, "How are we to interpret the passage in the Talmud where Rabbi Simeon ben Yochai says to his son, 'My son, you and I are enough for the world?'" He replied, "In the Tosefta we read, 'The meaning which underlies the creation of the world is that the creature says, "You are our God," and the Holy One, blessed be He, says, "I am the Lord your God." This you and this I are enough for the world. God's Prayer. This question was put to the rabbi of Radoshitz. There is one sentence in the Talmud which we do not understand. We read, "Whence do you deduce that God Himself prays?" It says, "And I shall bring them to my holy mountain and make them joyful in the house of prayer." It does not say their prayer, but my prayer. And it follows from this that God himself prays. How shall we interpret this? Is the but supposed to exclude the prayers of man? He answered, not at all. God takes pleasure in the prayer of righteous men. And more than that, it is he who wakens those prayers within them and gives them the strength to pray. And so man's prayer is God's prayer. The light behind the window. On a certain Passover, before the Seder celebration, Rabbi Yisachar Ber called his guest, the Rabbi of Mogielnica, a grandson of the Maggid of Koznitz, to the window and pointed to something outside. Do you see, Rav of Mogielnica? He said. Do you see? After the feast was over, the Rabbi of Mogielnica danced around the table and sang in a low voice, the holy old man, our brother, has shown me a light. Great is the light he has shown me. But who knows? Who knows how many years must pass? How long we still must sleep before it comes to us? Before it comes to us. Shalom of Bells. Transformation. Rabbi Shalom's elder brother once asked him, how did you happen to attain to such perfection? When we were quite young, I learned more quickly than you. This is how it happened, brother, the Rabbi of Bells replied. When I became bar mitzvah, my grandfather, Rabbi Eliezer of Amsterdam, of blessed memory, came to me one night in a vision and gave me another soul in exchange for mine. Ever since that time, I have been a different person. The light of the teachings. Young Shalom's first teacher was the Rabbi of Lutsk in Sokol. Then he heard about the seer of Lublin, and the more he heard about him, the more his heart burned with longing to hear his Torah. But when he asked his teacher's permission to go to the seer, it was refused. If you go to Lublin, he said, I shall take from you all you have accomplished here. Shalom did not let this stop him, however, and went to Lublin notwithstanding. When he returned and passed his teacher's house, the rabbi happened to be standing at the window. He called his wife. Just look, said he, how the light of the Torah shines out from the face of my disciple. The Confession. A Hasid relates, once I went to Rabbi Shalom of Bells and told him my trouble, that while I prayed, alien thoughts came and confused me. Not thoughts about the business of the day, but evil and frightening visions. And I begged him to heal my soul. When I had finished, he said to me, feel no shame before me, my son. Tell me everything that is disturbing and perplexing you. I started right in and told him about every terror and every lust which had attacked me. While I was speaking, he kept his eyes closed, but I looked at him and saw how his holy thoughts were laboring to draw those alien thoughts up from the depths of my soul. When I had ended, he said, God will help you to keep them away from now on, and ever since, they have never come into my mind. Tomorrow. It was before the Passover, and while the Hasidim were drawing water for the baking of the unleavened bread, they called to one another, next year, in Jerusalem. Then Rabbi Shalom said, why not? Before next year. With this water which we are now drawing, we may be baking unleavened bread in Jerusalem tomorrow, on the day before the feast, and may eat it if the Messiah comes to redeem us. Adam and Eve. On one of his frequent visits to the Rabbi of Belz, Rabbi Chaim of Zanz took his young son Baruch with him. They found Rabbi Shalom and his wife sitting at table in a room with plain board walls. They stayed for a while, and on their way home, Rabbi Chaim asked his son, what impression did those two make on you, the holy rabbi and his wife? As we entered the room, said the boy, they seemed to me like Adam and Eve before they sinned. That is just how they seemed to me, said his father. And how did the room in which they were seated look to you? Like paradise, said Baruch. That is just how it looked to me, said Rabbi Chaim. Why? When his wife died, Rabbi Shalom said, Lord of the world, if I had the strength to wake her, should I not have done so by now? I am simply not able to do it. But you, Lord of the world, you have the strength, and you can do it. Why don't you waken Israel? Hayim of Zans, and Yehezkel of Shenyava. The fire. When the town of Brody burned, and little Hayim was taken to Rabbi Moshe Leib's house in Sassof, the Tzaddik said to him, "Hayim, tell me what you saw during the fire." The boy replied, "On the one side I saw Jews putting out the fire, and on the other I saw Germans, the name given to those who had rejected Jewish dress and customs, setting fires. So I asked myself, why are the Jews taking so much trouble putting out the flames? It would be simpler just to drive away the Germans, and there would soon be an end to the fire." Nothing but. When Rabbi Hayim was a boy, someone once heard him running back and forth in his room and whispering to himself without stopping, "I mean nothing but you alone." His bad foot. In his youth, Rabbi Hayim Zans was a disciple of the Tzaddik of Ropchitz. His fervor in praying was so great that he stamped on the floor with both feet, but one foot was lame. Once, when the Tzaddik's wife had watched Hayim pray, she went to her husband and said, "What a heartless person you are. Why do you let him pound the floor with his bad foot? Tell him to use only his good foot." "I could do that right enough," answered the Tzaddik, "if, in praying, he knew every time whether he was using his good or his bad foot." 1-2. For the smallest spark. A Tzaddik who bore Rabbi Hayim of Zans a grudge once said to him, "You climb around in the upper worlds, and I accomplish just as much as you when I recite 10 psalms." "It is true that I climb around in those worlds," the Rabbi of Zans replied, "but for the smallest spark of the fear of God, I give up everything else." Teaching and service. A certain Rav, very anxious to discuss sublime subjects with the Rabbi of Zans with no one to listen in on their conversation, finally managed to have the Tzaddik invite him on the drive he always took before the afternoon prayer. When the town lay behind them, Rabbi Hayim asked him what he had on his mind. "The question I should like to put to you," said the Rav, "is this: what is the difference between the way of teaching and the way of service?" The rabbi lit his pipe and blew thick clouds of smoke into the clear air. In between, he uttered long, low growls, like a restless lion. The Rav felt very ill at ease and wished he had never put his question. When they had driven about a mile, the Tzaddik roused himself and said, "You want to know the difference between the way of teaching and the way of service? I shall tell you. The way of teaching is when a man is always ready to give his soul for the glory of God. And the way of service is when a man is always prepared to fulfill the verse." My soul failed me when he spoke. He knocked at the window, and this indicated to the coachman that he was to start back home. To the people. A rather officious man once insisted on presenting a request to Rabbi Hayim after the afternoon prayer. When he refused to take no for an answer, the Tzaddik spoke roughly to him. A friend who was present asked him why he was so angry, and he answered that whoever uttered the afternoon prayer was face to face with the world of emanation. Why should he not be angry, coming from that world, to be annoyed with the petty troubles of a petty man? His friend replied, following the passage in the scriptures, which tells of God's first revelation to Moses on Sinai, we read, "And Moses went down from the mount unto the people." Rashi's comment on this is, this informs us that when Moses left the mount, he did not return to his own affairs, but to the people. How are we to interpret that? What affairs in the desert did our teacher, Moses, peace be upon him, renounce in order to go to the people? We must interpret it as follows. When Moses descended from the mountain, he was still clinging to the upper worlds, and in them was accomplishing his sublime work of permeating the divine attribute of rigor with that of mercy. Those were the affairs Moses had to attend to, and yet he paused in his great work, disengaged himself from the upper worlds, and turned to the people. He listened to all their petty troubles, stored the heaviness of heart of all Israel within himself, and then bore it upward in prayer. When Rabbi Hayim heard this, his anger melted away. He asked someone to call back the man he had shouted at, and gave ear to his request. Almost all that night he listened to the troubles and wishes of the Hasidim gathered about him. His reason. The rabbi of Zons once said, "I love the poor, and do you know why? It is because God loves them." What you get out of life. The rabbi of Zons told the following story and accompanied his words with gestures that conjured up a picture. People come to me who ride to market every day in the week. One such man approached me and cried, "My dear rabbi, I haven't gotten anything out of life. All week I get out of one wagon and into another." But when a man stops to think that he is permitted to pray to God himself, he lacks nothing at all in the world. The apples. A poor woman, an apple vendor whose stand was near Rabbi Chaim's house, once came to him complaining, "Rabbi, I have no money to buy what I need for the Sabbath." "And what about your apple stand?" asked the tzaddik. "People say my apples are bad," she answered, "and they won't buy." Rabbi Chaim immediately ran out on the street and called, "Who wants to buy good apples?" A crowd collected around him in no time at all. They handed out coins without looking at them or counting them, and soon all the apples were sold for 2 and 3 times what they were worth. "Now you see," he said to the woman as he turned to go, "your apples were good. All that was the matter was that people just didn't know about it." The turkey. Rabbi Chaim had singled out certain poor people in his town and gave them money every month. Not merely alms, he gave each what he required to support himself and his family. On a certain market day, a poultry dealer brought an unusually fine turkey to Zons. He took it straight to the rabbi's house and tried to sell it to his wife for the Sabbath, but she thought it too dear, and so the man went off with his high-priced bird. A little later, the woman found out that one of the men who received his sustenance from her husband had bought the turkey. "Now look at your poor," she complained to the rabbi. "I wasn't able to buy the bird because the price was too high, but that man went and bought it." "That shows," said the tzaddik, "that he wants a good turkey as well for the Sabbath. I didn't know that, but now that I do know it, I must raise the amount I give him every month." Putting to shame. A poor schoolteacher once came to visit Rabbi Chaim of Zons. "I suppose you are preparing for your daughter's wedding," said the tzaddik. "I don't know," said the other. Rabbi Chaim looked at him inquiringly. "I still haven't the money to buy the bridegroom a prayer shawl and a fur cap, as custom demands," said the schoolteacher sadly. Rabbi Yehezkel, the rabbi's son, who was listening to the conversation, interrupted at this point. "Father," he cried, "just a few days ago I saw this man buying both these things." The teacher reddened and left the room in silence. "What have you done?" said Rabbi Chaim. "Perhaps he was not able to pay for what he bought, or perhaps he needs money to have a dress made for his wife to wear at the wedding, but does not want to say so. And now you have put a man to shame." Rabbi Yehezkel ran into the street, caught up with the schoolteacher, and begged his forgiveness. But the man refused to forgive him and insisted that the tzaddik should judge the matter. Soon they both stood before him. "Don't forgive him," the old man said to the schoolteacher. "Don't forgive him until he has paid the entire cost of the wedding down to the last shoelace." And so it was done. True wisdom. One day the rabbi of Zons was standing at the window and looking out into the street. Seeing a passerby, he knocked on the pane and signed to the man to come into the house. When the stranger entered the room, Rabbi Chaim asked him, "Tell me, if you found a purse full of ducats, would you return it to its owner?" "Rabbi," said the man, "if I knew the owner, I should return the purse without a moment's delay." "You are a fool," said the rabbi of Zons. Then he resumed his position at the window, called another passerby, and put the same question to him. "I'm not so foolish as all that," said this man. "I am not such a fool as to give up a purse full of money that comes my way." "You're a bad lot," said the rabbi of Zons, and called in a third man. He replied, "Rabbi, how can I know on what rung I shall be when I find the purse, or whether I shall succeed in fending off the evil urge? Perhaps it will get the better of me, and I shall appropriate what belongs to another. But perhaps God Blessed be he, will help me fight it, and in that case I shall return what I have found to its rightful owner." "Those are good words," cried the Tzaddik. "You are a true sage." The story of the general. Once, when Rabbi Hayim was on a journey, great honors were showered upon him. Later he said to his son who had accompanied him, "I shall tell you a story about a general. It is customary for the guards to accord greater honor to a general than to a colonel. Now it once happened that a general was court-martialed because of some wrong he had done and demoted to colonel. When he left the house in which the military court had sat and passed the guards, they did not notice that he no longer wore a general's insignia and saluted him just as always. Only then was he pierced to the heart." Looking for the way. In the month of Elul, when men prepare their souls for the days of judgment, Rabbi Hayim was in the habit of telling stories to a tune that moved all his listeners to turn to God. Once he told this story. A man lost his way in a great forest. After a while, another lost his way and chanced on the first. Without knowing what had happened to him, he asked the way out of the woods. "I don't know," said the first, "but I can point out the ways that lead further into the thicket, and after that, let us try to find the way together. So, my congregation," the rabbi concluded his story, "let us look for the way together." In the king's uniform? The servant of the rabbi of Zanz told this story. One morning before prayers, the rabbi lay down again for a short while because he was suddenly tired. Just then and later, we discovered that it was by mistake, because all practical affairs were usually referred to the Tzaddik's son, the rabbi of the district. A soldier came to collect taxes. The Tzaddik was startled when he laid eyes on him. When the soldier had gone, he said to me, "This soldier is a simple peasant, but when he appears in the king's uniform, we fear him. Let us put on the king's uniform, the prayer shawl and the phylacteries, and all the nations will fear the king." It said, all. The rabbi of Zanz used to say, "All Tzaddikim serve, each in his own way, each according to his rung, and whoever says, 'Only my rabbi is righteous,' loses both worlds." A piece of advice. Rabbi Hayim had married his son to the daughter of Rabbi Eliezer of Jikov, who was a son of Rabbi Naphtali of Ropchitz. The day after the wedding, he visited the father of the bride and said, "Now that we are related, I feel close to you and can tell you what is eating at my heart. Look, my hair and beard have turned white, and I have not yet atoned." "Oh, my friend," replied Rabbi Eliezer, "you are thinking only of yourself. How about forgetting yourself and thinking of the world?" Resignation. The rabbi of Zanz used to tell this story about himself. "In my youth, when I was fired with the love of God, I thought I would convert the whole world to God. But soon I discovered that it would be quite enough to convert the people who lived in my town, and I tried for a long time, but did not succeed. Then I realized that my program was still much too ambitious, and I concentrated on the persons in my own household, but I could not convert them either. Finally it dawned on me, I must work upon myself so that I may give true service to God, but I did not accomplish even this." The missing number. Shortly before his death, Rabbi Hayim said to a man who had come to visit him, "If I had 9 true friends whose hearts were one with mine, we should each put a loaf in his knapsack and go out into the field together and walk in the field and pray until our prayers were granted and redemption came." It says in the pulpit, when Rabbi Yehezkel, the son of the rabbi of Zanz, was stopping in the town of Ujheli in Hungary, he had the crier announce that he would preach in the house of prayer. The entire congregation gathered at the appointed time. The rabbi ascended the pulpit and said, "My friends, once I preached in this place, and my heart was not wholly directed toward heaven. But to pray with a divided heart is a great sin, and so I decided to do penance. Now according to the word of our sages, Wrong must be expiated where it was done, and so I have again come to this pulpit. And I pray to the Holy One, blessed be He, to forgive me." Thereupon the whole congregation recognized the power of the Word of God. The fear of God entered their hearts, and all accomplished the turning. His discourse. When Rabbi Yehezkel was elected Rav of the town, he was still a young man. The entire congregation expected him to preach a sermon on the first Sabbath after his arrival, for such was the custom, but he denied them their wish. At the third Sabbath meal, the most distinguished men of the town, who were guests at his table, begged him to expound the Torah to them. He called for a Bible, opened to the weekly portion, and read it through from beginning to end. Then he said, "This is the Torah of God. It is holy, and it is not my office to talk about it." He kissed the book and had it put back in its place. Zevi Hirsch of Zhaidachov, Yehuda Zevi of Rozdal, and Yitzhak Asik of Zhaidachov. From the depths. Rabbi Hirsch of Zhaidachov told this story. "On the day before the Sabbath, they drove me out of the town of Brody, and I was in great disgrace. I walked on and on without stopping, and when I got home toward evening, just before the beginning of the Sabbath, I went to the house of prayer in my workaday clothes, and could only just manage to say the words of the prayer. But in the morning before I prayed, I spoke to God, saying, 'Lord of the world, you see the humiliation of those who have been humiliated, and you see my crushed heart. Give me light so that I can pray to you.' Then suddenly my heart caught fire. My prayer was a flowing flame. Never before had that happened to me, and it will never happen again." The double answer. Rabbi Hirsch once said to his Hasidim, "When a man comes to me and asks me to pray for help in some need of his in this world, one on behalf of a lease, another on behalf of a shop, his soul besieges me at that instant and asks for redemption in the upper world. And it is my duty to reply to both of his entreaties with a single answer. It is not the multitude that does it." Once when Rabbi Hirsch of Zhaidachov entered the house of prayer, he said to the Hasidim who were gathered there, "My sons, it is written, a king is not saved by the multitude of a host. It is of no help to God when a Tzaddik has a multitude of Hasidim." His suspicion. The rabbi of Komarno, who was a nephew of Rabbi Hirsch, related this incident. It was the Feast of Weeks. Dawn was just breaking when I entered the room of my teacher and uncle, but he did not notice me. He was walking back and forth, and I heard him crying out his heart to God. Now, at that time, 400 or 500 people had come to him over the holidays. He said, "Perhaps Samael has sent me this multitude to tempt me away from you? Have pity on my poor soul, that I may not be exiled from your presence." Every rabbi is good. One Sabbath, Rabbi Zevi Hirsch interrupted his teachings at the third meal and said, "There are Hasidim who travel to their rabbi and say that save for him, there is no rabbi in all the world. That is idol worship. What then should they say? They should say, every rabbi is good for his people, but our rabbi is best for what concerns us." Illuminated. When Rabbi Moshe of Sambor, Rabbi Zevi Hirsch's younger brother, was a youth, he went about in the villages and traded with the peasants. But when he came home and said the afternoon prayer, he felt as if his whole body were lit by a great light. He himself tells this story. "I once asked my brother and teacher, 'Why is it? Sometimes when I have been traveling on business and come home and begin to pray, I feel illuminated, almost as though the divine presence had come to me?' And my brother answered me in his usual clear, direct way, 'Why should you be surprised at that? When a traveler walks in the way of God, then whether he knows it or not, all the holy sparks which cling to the herbs of the field and the trees of the forest rush forth and attach themselves to such a man, and this illuminates him with a great light.'" Not yet. When Rabbi Hirsch was on his way to Munkacs, he visited old Rabbi Moshe in Ujele, and Rabbi Moshe complained to him, as he had done so often before, that the Messiah had not yet come. "You know," said Rabbi Hirsch, I stake my whole self for everyone, even the most unfaithful, and probe down to the root of his apostasy, where wickedness can be recognized as need and lust. And if I get that far, I can pull him out all right? What do you say? Shall we give all those souls up as lost? For wouldn't they be lost if the Messiah came today? The change in the work. When Rabbi Hirsch returned from his wife's funeral and went up the stairs to his room, he was heard saying to himself, "Up to now, I have accomplished holy unification by marriage here below. Now I shall try to accomplish unification by marriage up above." 2 weeks later, he died. The Everlasting Foundation. The wife of Rabbi Yehuda Zevi of Rosdol, whose uncle was Rabbi Hirsch, once asked him, "Why don't you say something to your enemies who are out to hurt you? And why do you even do them favors when you could be bringing God's punishment down upon them by prayer?" He said, "Did you never stop to think why so many people go to the Tzaddik and bring him gifts? Hundreds and thousands of gifts just to one man? It is because every building must have a foundation, and without it, the structure cannot stand. Now the structure of the world stands because of the Tzaddik. As it is written, the righteous is the foundation of the world. And so it is only right that all support him who supports them all. But why should people come to me as well and bring gifts to me even though I am not a Tzaddik? I have thought about this and weighed the question. Then it occurred to me that the world requires still another foundation. For it is written, He hangeth the world over nothingness. And the Talmud comments on this, the world rests upon him who, in the hour of conflict, reduces himself to nothing, and does not say anything against those who hate him. So you see, it is because people need nothingness in addition to the Tzaddik that they support me. The greatest lust. A learned man once said to the rabbi of Rosdol, "It seems to me that the condition of being a Tzaddik is the greatest of all lusts." "That's how it is," the rabbi replied. "But to attain to it, you first have to get the better of all the lesser lusts." Remembering and forgetting. On New Year's Day, Rabbi Yehuda Zevi of Rosdol said, "Today we have prayed, for thou art he who remembereth from eternity all forgotten things." What is the meaning of this? That God remembers only what man forgets. When someone does a good deed and it slips his mind, and he does not remember having done anything good at all, then God remembers his service. But when a man's heart swells with pride, and he says to himself, "How well I spoke, how well I learned," then nothing of all of this persists in the eyes of God. When a man falls into sin and later dwells upon it and repents, God will forget that sin, but he remembers sins which are lightly thrust aside. The Cord of Grace. Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac of Zhaidachov, Rabbi Hirsch's nephew, was an only son. Once when he was little more than a boy, his father asked him, "How do you interpret the words of our sages? Whoever occupies himself with the Torah by night, around him God strings a cord of grace by day. Do we not always rise at midnight to occupy ourselves with the Torah? And are we not in need and trouble by day notwithstanding? So where does the cord of grace come in?" The boy answered, "Father, the fact that we rise midnight after midnight and occupy ourselves with the Torah without heeding our troubles, that in itself is the cord of grace." And Oz. 3 signs. On one of his visits to Rabbi Zevi Hirsch, Rabbi Shalom of Kaminka took his son, young Yehoshua, to Zhaidachov with him. At the midday meal, the boy saw a youth with heavy black curls enter the room. In one hand he carried a pitcher of water, in the other a bowl, and a towel was slung over his shoulder. He went from one person to the next all around the table, with a joy that shone from his face and animated his whole body, and waited on them until they had all washed their hands. "Father," asked Yehoshua, "who is that dark youth?" "Take a good look at him," answered Rabbi Shalom. "He will be a prince in Israel." Many years later, when Rabbi Hirsch had died and his younger brother Yitzhak Isaac, that same dark youth had become rabbi of Zhidachov, and Hasidim were streaming to him from all over. His fame reached Rabbi Yehoshua, who had become his father's successor in Kamenka. "I'll go to him," he decided, "and watch him to find out whether his way is right, and whether I should become his disciple. And I shall think up 3 signs I must have for this. First, he must come to greet me when I arrive. Second, he must invite me to eat with him. Third, he must guess one of my thoughts." Rabbi Yehoshua set out for Zhidachov, but as he approached the town, he suddenly felt feverish, and when he arrived, he had to be carried from his carriage and put to bed. When Rabbi Yitzhak heard of this, he visited Rabbi Yehoshua and said he would surely be well that very day, and so he should have supper with him. Later, when Rabbi Yehoshua, who really had gotten over his fever, was seated at Rabbi Yitzhak's table, his host said to him smilingly, "Well, Rav of Kamenka, and if a man is not able to guess another's thoughts, does that mean he isn't a rabbi?" Rabbi Yehoshua became one of Rabbi Yitzhak's favorite disciples. Give and take. Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac said, "The motto of life is give and take. Everyone must be both a giver and a receiver. He who is not both is as a barren tree." Through the darkness. Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac never exhibited any violent emotion in praying. He prayed in a gentle and holy voice, but his words trembled through every heart in the house of prayer. Once on the Feast of Weeks, when he spoke the song of praise which precedes the reading of the Torah, one of his disciples who had known the seer of Lublin was so deeply stirred that he lost the use of his eyes. He did not regain his sight until the tzaddik stopped speaking. After prayers, he told his teacher what had happened, and Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac explained it to him, saying, "That was because your soul, which was caught up in the Word, went through the darkness, cloud, and thick darkness of Mount Sinai." A breath. A disciple of Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac told this story. "In the beginning, when I came to hear our Master speak, but was not yet able to understand him, I opened my mouth wide, so that at least his holy breath might enter into me." Moralizing. Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac of Zhidachov was once host to Rabbi Zalman Leib of Shiget in Hungary, who brought with him a number of his Hasidim, among them several farm and vineyard owners, who were beginning to behave somewhat like the so-called enlightened group. Rabbi Zalman begged his host to admonish them. "Admonishing is not the custom here," replied the tzaddik. "When I face my congregation on the Sabbath and say the prayer, 'All shall thank thee, and all shall praise thee,' those are our words of admonition. If they fail to rouse a man to the turning, moralizing will not do any good." On the following day, while Rabbi Yitzhak, standing in front of the ark, was saying, "All shall thank thee," the rabbi from Hungary happened to look at those of his people who were worrying him, and he saw that they were weeping. The Exile Festival. Rabbi Yitzhak Isaac wanted to go to the Holy Land and settle there. His sons and his friends tried to shake his resolve and did not succeed. But then something very strange happened. On the evening before the second day of Passover, the tzaddik entered the house of prayer in the prayer shawl he wore on weekdays. After the prayer of benedictions, he stood silent instead of beginning on the festival psalms, and his congregation waited in astonishment, for the like had never happened before. After a time he began to recite the psalms, and he spoke with the same sublime animation as always. Later, in the course of the meal, he said, "Today during the evening prayer, I was wholly deprived of the power to think, and not only that, I felt I was wearing my everyday prayer shawl. I did not know what God had done to me, but finally it was revealed to me. Because I wanted to go to the land of Israel, I no longer had any connection with the holiness of the second day of the festival, which is observed only in the countries outside Palestine, and I remained in the weekday. When I realized this, I thought over everything very thoroughly and decided not to give up this holiness, but rather to renounce settling in the Holy Land. Not until then was the power of thought restored to me." I But even though Rabbi Yitzhak had renounced his intention of going to the land of Israel, He was there at all times with his eyes and his heart. He had a house of prayer built in the holy city of Safed, and it was named for him. From then on, he used to say that it was through it that his prayers rose to heaven. He also said that every day after the morning prayer, he made an excursion to the Holy Land. And when some passage in the Book of Splendor would not reveal itself to his understanding, he would lean his head on the box into which one puts donations for the Holy Land in the name of Rabbi Meir, the worker of miracles, a box he always kept on his table, and would repeat the saying of our sages, "The air of the land of Israel makes wise," and instantly the gates of light swung open to him. They traveled together. A Hasid wished to go to the land of Israel and went to Rabbi Yitzhak to ask his advice in the matter. The Tzaddik said, "Wait a while. You and I will go to the land of Israel together." The Hasid thought that Rabbi Yitzhak intended traveling there and waited to hear from him. But the message he received was news of the Tzaddik's death. When he heard this, he said, "Then I must prepare for the journey." He immersed himself in the ritual bath, bade them call the Holy Brotherhood, and confessed his sins. Then he wrote his last will and testament and lay down. A few days later, he died. Free. During the last year of his life, Rabbi Isaac of Zhaidachov often lifted his hands toward the window that gave on the street and said to himself, "Take a look at it. Take a look at the coarse world." On the morning of the day of his death, he died. Toward evening, he put on his prayer shawl and phylacteries as always. But when he had uttered the first benediction of the morning prayer, he ordered his prayer shawl and phylacteries taken off and said, "Today I am free of prayer shawl and phylacteries and commandments, and I shall soon be free of the world."